I don't scare easy, and I grew up camping, so I'm not the type to post about shadows and swear they were demons. I'm a father, mid-30s, the kind of person who overpacks first aid and argues about proper food storage. Last August, I took my family, my wife, our 15-year-old son, and our 9-year-old daughter to Blue Water Lake State Park in western New Mexico. It's about 30 miles west of Grants, not far off Interstate 40. We'd been there once before for a day trip and liked the quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned, away from the constant hum of civilization. This time we booked a site for 2 nights on the Northern Loop, close to the water but not right on it. The plan was simple: fish in the morning, swim in the afternoon, cook on the fire, and get my kids off screens for a weekend. Something wholesome, something normal. When we checked in, a park employee in a green uniform told me our site would be really quiet. He said it like it was either a plus or a warning, his eyes lingering on mine for just a moment too long. The pause after his words hung there, and I almost asked him what he meant, but my wife was already pulling out the confirmation printout and my daughter was tugging at my shirt, asking when we could see the lake. I figured he meant we wouldn't be jammed between big RVs with generators running all night. That's what I told myself. We drove the loop, past a few scattered tents, and found ours tucked behind a few low trees and scrub. A narrow path cut down toward the lake through brittle grass that crunched under our shoes. You could see boats out on the water in the distance, small aluminum rigs with outboard motors and a couple of kayaks cutting lazy paths across the surface. The sky was a clear, endless blue, and it felt like every family should have a day like that. I'll say this up front: the place is beautiful in the daylight, almost aggressively beautiful, the kind of landscape that makes you forget cities exist. The air tasted clean, though with that high desert dryness that makes your lips crack if you're not careful. Heat radiated up from the packed earth, and the sun felt closer than it should, more personal. We set up without trouble. I hammered steaks while my wife unrolled sleeping bags with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this dozens of times. Our son, let's call him Miguel, spent a good half hour skipping rocks with decent form, his thin frame silhouetted against the water. Our daughter, Sophia, collected chalky, sun-bleached stones along the trail and lined them up on a flat rock like a museum display, narrating their imagined histories in that way 9-year-olds do, where every object becomes precious. The smell out there is familiar if you've spent time in the Southwest sage, dry dirt, hot sun mixed with something mineral and ancient. A raven flapped overhead once, its shadow passing over our tent, and that was the loudest thing we heard all afternoon. Even Miguel's rock skipping seemed muted, the splashes absorbed by the vastness of the lake and sky. There isn't much to complain about at Blue Water Lake when the sun is high. The heat is honest, the land is open, and you can see trouble coming from a mile away. It's the darkness I should have thought about more carefully. Around 6, the breeze died off and the heat settled into that particular stillness that comes before evening, where the air feels suspended. We drove to the little store in Grants for ice and snacks, the kind of small convenience store with a handwritten sign and a bell that jingles when you open the door. The woman behind the counter smiled at Sophia when she picked out candy, but I noticed she didn't make eye contact with me. On the way back, we took NM 612 from the south, the road that angles in toward the park entrance through miles of nothing but scrub and telephone poles. The kids were quiet in the back, the way kids get when they're worn out from the sun and fresh air. I remember thinking I'd sleep like a rock, that deep camping sleep where your body remembers it's an animal and shuts down completely. We ate hot dogs and beans cooked over the fire, cleaned up, and were in the tent by 10:30. I set the cooler in the shade, stashed trash in the car with the doors locked, and latched the windows on the SUV. Routine stuff, the kind of evening ritual that feels safe because you've done it 100 times. I even joked with my wife about whether we'd see shooting stars, though neither of us stayed up long enough to look. The last thing I remember before falling asleep was the sound of Sophia's breathing evening out, that soft rhythm that tells you a child has surrendered to sleep. I woke up the first time around 12:20 a.m. I know because I checked my watch, the illuminated numbers glowing green in the darkness. The tent was warm and still, the air inside thick with the smell of sleeping bags and the faint sweetness of Sophia's strawberry shampoo. My wife was on her side, facing away from me, her breathing slow and steady. On the other side of the tent, the kids had rolled toward each other in their bags and made a pile of limbs, the way siblings do even when they claim to hate sharing space. I lay there listening to the absolute quiet. No motor from the lake, no wheels on gravel, no distant voices, just air and the slight rustle of nylon when I shifted position. The silence was so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I've camped in remote places before the Rockies, the Cascades, even a week in Alaska where the darkness stretched for 20 hours, but this felt different. This felt expectant. Something about the quality of the silence made me aware of my own heartbeat, the rush of blood in my ears. I told myself it was the altitude, or the heat still trapped in the tent, or just the strangeness of the first night in a new place. Your body needs time to adjust, to learn what sounds are normal. I fell asleep again without thinking much about it, though some part of me remained aware, hovering just below consciousness like I was waiting for something. The second time I woke, it was because something stepped close to the tent, not rustling. This was weight on dirt, the unmistakable compression of earth under something heavy. One step, then nothing, a pause that stretched too long. I held my breath and waited for the next one, my body going rigid. My heart knocked around for a few seconds, that immediate animal response before your mind catches up and tries to rationalize. I told myself it was a raccoon, or maybe one of the stray dogs that wander through parks sometimes. I've had bears push around cook boxes in Colorado, their huffing and snuffling so close I could smell them through the tent. I've had elk walk right through campsites in Utah, their hooves like drums on the hard ground. You learn when to intervene and when to let an animal pass. You learn the difference between curious and aggressive. I kept still and listened. Another step, slow, deliberate, like a person taking care not to make sound. Not the random wandering of an animal, but something methodical. The weight was wrong, too heavier than a dog, distributed differently than a deer. I sat up and unzipped the sleeping bag as quietly as I could, the sound of the zipper absurdly loud in the silence. My wife's hand found my leg in the dark, her fingers cold and tight. I could feel the question in her grip. I told her quietly it was probably nothing, that I was going to look, trying to keep my voice level and calm. I didn't want the kids to wake up to me crawling around in a panic. Fear is contagious, especially in the dark, especially in confined spaces. I grabbed the flashlight from my shoe where I always keep it, feeling the familiar weight of it in my palm. I took a breath, lifted the flap, and stepped out in my socks. The air outside felt wrong. It was warmer than it should be at 2 in the morning in August. Close, a little stale, like air that had been breathed already. The stars were out but seemed dimmer than before, or maybe my eyes hadn't adjusted yet. I clicked on the light. The circle caught the nearest tree trunks, their bark pale and peeling. The beam swept across our picnic table, the cooler sitting beside it, an empty space above the dirt where moths should have been swarming. I traced the beam in a slow half circle, my thumb resting on the button, ready to turn it off if I needed to hide. The light hit something standing by the tree line. It looked like my son. Every detail screamed familiarity. He was 25 feet away, just past the edge of our sight where the ground drops toward the trail to the water. The face, the hair, the height. The way he stood with his weight slightly on one leg, that teenage slouch I was always telling him to correct. It was close enough that my brain filled in the details automatically and said, "That's your kid. He's sleepwalking. Go get him." Except behind me, inside the tent, I could hear Miguel's steady breathing, and I could see 2 shapes pressed against the nylon, both kids exactly where they should be. The math didn't work, but my eyes kept insisting, kept trying to make sense of something that wore my son's body like borrowed clothes. I raised the light higher on purpose, straight into the face. Miguel has a small scar on his right eyebrow from a skateboard fall 3 years ago, a thin white line he's self-conscious about. The thing had it too, but not exactly. It was too centered, too symmetrical, like a copy made from a description rather than from life. The skin around it looked stretched, pulled too tight over the bones beneath. The texture was wrong, too smooth, almost waxy in the beam of the flashlight. And it blinked. If you want to know what reset my thinking from sleep mode to full danger, it was the blink. The eyelids moved up instead of down. Bottom to top, smooth, with no eyelash flutter, no reflex squint, no moisture. Just this mechanical lift of skin that revealed the whites of the eyes too white, too clean, like fresh paper. The mouth was slightly open, and every few seconds it opened wider without the jaw hinging the way it should. The movement was wrong, too smooth, like watching something melt and reform. The light didn't make it squint. People flinch when a bright light goes in their eyes at night. It's involuntary, protective, human. This didn't. It just stood there, absorbing the light, the pupils not contracting, the face not moving except for that awful mouth opening and closing. "Miguel," I said, testing the name in a level voice. Not loud, not a challenge, just his name. The word felt strange in my mouth, like I was calling to something I knew wasn't him but couldn't name. Nothing. No response, no acknowledgement. The face didn't change expression. I took a small step to my right to angle the beam, to see if it would track me, to see if it had normal reflexes. It rotated toward me, slow, mechanically smooth, like someone learning how to move shoulders. The arms hung straight, too straight, fingertips not curling the way human hands do at rest. The posture was wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, too perfect, too still, like a mannequin or a photograph. Nothing about it suggested warmth or blood or breath. I picked up a rock from the ground because I needed the world to act like the world. I needed cause and effect, action and reaction. I lobbed it into the dirt near its feet, not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to provoke a response. The rock bounced and skittered across the packed earth, the sound sharp in the quiet. It didn't react. Not a flinch, not a glance down, not a single muscle twitch. It just kept staring at me with those wrong eyes and that hanging open mouth. That's when fear flattened everything. I don't mean panic. I mean clarity with an edge. The way time seems to slow and sharpen when your brain realizes you're in actual danger. My arms prickled with goose flesh despite the heat. My hearing became acute. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the faint sound of my wife's breathing from inside the tent, the absence of normal night sounds. No crickets, no breeze, nothing. I remembered there's a knife in the cookbox, a hatchet in the SUV, a whistle snapped to my backpack. None of those things mattered against something I couldn't categorize, something that stood outside the normal rules. What do you do when confronted with something that wears a familiar face, but moves like something learning to be human? You need to leave, I said, because that's what came out. My voice sounded thin and strange, absorbed by the air. The thing's head tilted slightly, and for a moment I thought it was mimicking confusion. Then it took a step. The knee lifted too high, like it was stepping over something that wasn't there. The foot came down carefully, testing the ground, and then the weight shifted forward in a movement that was almost right but fundamentally wrong. Another step, same odd motion, like watching someone operate a body from the inside for the first time. Then it moved. 1 second it was slow and deliberate, and the next it ran into the trees in a straight line so fast I lost it at the edge of my light. No build-up, no acceleration, no panting or sound of exertion, just gone. The only sound was brush moving apart and then snapping back together. Then everything was still again, more still than before, like the night was holding its breath. I stood there until my arm shook from holding the flashlight up, the beam wavering across empty space. I counted to 60 in my head, then did it again, straining to hear any sound of movement or breathing. Nothing came back. I turned off the light to save the battery, and because I suddenly didn't want to see what else might be out there, waiting at the edge of the beam. Going back inside, the tent felt like crawling into a trap, but staying outside felt worse. I zipped the flap carefully, my hands shaking, and sat down on my sleeping bag. My wife whispered, "What?" I told her I saw someone at the tree line and that I probably scared them off and that we'd pack at first light. I felt her hand grip my arm hard enough to hurt. I know what people will say. Wake the kids, get in the car, leave immediately. I thought about it. The problem is it takes time to get 2 kids into a vehicle when they're asleep and confused. You have to explain without causing panic, find shoes in the dark, zip bags, collapse the tent. And the distance between the tent and the car felt like an exposed path, 40 feet of open ground. If that thing was still nearby, if it was watching, the safest place for the next few hours was a zipped tent with the 4 of us together and me awake. So I sat there, light in my hand, and I watched the seam of the door until the gray of morning showed through the nylon. I never heard another step, but I swear I felt watched. That pressure of being observed, of being measured. My wife stayed awake too, I could tell from her breathing, from the tension in her body beside mine. We didn't speak, we just waited for the sun. The gray light of dawn was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. That gradual shift from black to blue to pale gray, the way shapes emerged from shadow and became ordinary again. Trees were just trees. Dirt was just dirt, but my body felt wrong, adrenaline sick and hollow, muscles cramping from hours of frozen stillness. We didn't talk much while we packed. That's not bravado. That's focus. That's 2 parents operating on the same frequency of fear and determination. My wife rolled sleeping bags with mechanical efficiency while I took down poles. Every sound made me turn a bird call, the rustle of something small in the brush, even the wind picking up with the sunrise. I told the kids we were leaving early to beat heat in crowds, trying to keep my voice light. There was no argument. Miguel moved slower than usual, like he'd been hit with a heavy workout the day before, his movements stiff and deliberate. He kept looking at the trees with a blank expression I couldn't read. Sophia, who almost always hums when she's happy, was quiet in a way that worried me more than questions would have. I had to go back to the rock where we'd lined up Sophia's stone collection because she wanted to take 2 of them home. I wasn't thrilled about extending our time by even 30 seconds, but I walked over, my wife's eyes tracking me the whole way. Standing there, bent down to pick up the smooth stone Sophia had chosen, I realized why the hair on my arms lifted again. There were 2 sets of footprints in the powdery dirt at the edge of camp. Mine from the night I could tell by the pattern of my boot, the weight distribution, and another set that matched Miguel's shoe tread closely, but not perfectly. The spacing was off, longer than a 15-year-old's natural stride. The toe-off marks were too shallow for the length of stride, like something mimicking walking without understanding the mechanics of human movement. I crouched down and measured one print with my hand. The detail was extraordinary. You could see the pattern of wear on the sole, the small nick in the left shoe from when Miguel had kicked a curb. But the depth was wrong. Too light in some places, too heavy in others, like a map of footprints rather than the actual thing. I looked at the trees and saw nothing but morning light filtering through branches, but I felt that presence again, that weight of observation. I grabbed the stones and walked back quickly, not quite running but close. We had everything in the car in less than 10 minutes. The kids were buckled in the back, my wife in the passenger seat with her hands gripping her knees. I was just turning the key when Miguel said, "Dad." His voice had a flatness I don't hear often. Not fear, not even emotion, just this hollow quality that made my stomach drop. He was looking toward the same trees. Past the trunks, standing half in shadow where the morning light hadn't quite reached, was the face again. It was closer this time, maybe 15 feet from where our tent had been, in a spot that had been empty seconds before. The jaw hung open wider than before, the angle wrong, not hinged at the point a human jaw stops. I could see the throat, or what should have been a throat, just darkness inside, like looking into a well. The eyes didn't water, didn't react to the light filtering through the trees or the cooler morning air. It didn't move. It didn't breathe visibly. That might sound like a small detail, but when you're close to something that looks human, you expect to see the chest rise, the throat shift, the micro-movements that signal life. This was still as a photograph, but somehow I knew it was watching us. Miguel's hand closed on the handle of the door, like he couldn't decide whether to step out or slam it shut. Some part of him recognized what he was seeing, even if his conscious mind rejected it. I said his name and told him to look at me, sharp and urgent. He did, pulling his eyes away with visible effort. When we looked back, it was gone. No branches moved, no sound carried, no footprints appeared in the dirt. Just empty space where something had been standing. The absence felt deliberate, performative, like it wanted us to know it could disappear at will. I started the car and pulled onto the loop road, my hands tight on the wheel. The drive out felt longer than it should, every curve revealing nothing but empty pavement and scrub. I watched the mirror for a mile, looking for movement, for something keeping pace with us through the trees. There was nothing behind us but a strip of gray asphalt and bright morning sunlight, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched until we hit the main road. My wife's hands were braced on her knees, knuckles white. She didn't say a word until we hit the junction for Interstate 40. Then she said, "We're not going back there." Not a question, a statement of fact. I agreed without hesitation. Sophia said, "Was that thing Miguel?" From the back seat, her voice small and confused. My wife and I exchanged a look. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen in terms a 9-year-old could process. "No, baby," my wife said. "That was something else, something that didn't belong there." "Why did it look like him?" Sophia pressed. "I don't know," I said, which was the truth. Miguel stayed quiet, staring out the window, his reflection pale in the glass. We passed the exit for the El Moro area and the signs for Gallup and Grants. The landscape opened up, the claustrophobia of the trees giving way to the broad sweep of desert. The kids were both looking out opposite windows like they were expecting to see something keeping pace with us over the scrub, matching our speed, following us home. We stopped for gas in Grants at a combination gas station and small store, one of those places that feels frozen in time. I went inside for coffee and to breathe in conditioned air for a minute, to feel fluorescent lights and hear the hum of refrigerators, normal sounds from the normal world. The clerk was an older man with a gray mustache and weathered skin that spoke of decades under the desert sun. He glanced out at my SUV, at the cooler tied down and the rolled tent visible through the glass. "Camping?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Blue water." He nodded once and said, Good fishing sometimes. Not when you leave at dawn, I said, trying to make light of it. My voice sounded thin, even to my own ears. I added, because I needed to say it, because keeping it inside felt like poison. We were in the northern loop, quiet spot. He looked at me for a second like he recognized something he'd seen before. His expression shifted from casual to something more careful. That side gets weird, he said finally, the word hanging in the air between us. You all right? We're fine, I said. I stopped because I didn't know how to finish that sentence. We just saw something that shouldn't exist. We just encountered something wearing my son's face. None of it sounded real in the harsh fluorescent light. He reached under the counter and pulled out a pack of coffee stirrers and set them down, maybe just for something to do with his hands. When he looked up at me again, his eyes were serious. Couple years back, he said. Lower now. Fisherman packed up in the middle of the night. Left his gear, his food, everything. Came in here at dawn swearing he saw himself standing by the trees. Kept saying the eyes were wrong. Said they blinked wrong. My blood went cold, no. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing go shallow. What do you mean, blinked wrong? He couldn't explain it right. Just said it was backwards, or inside out, or something. Kept touching his own face like he needed to make sure he was still himself. The clerk paused. Folks around here talk about things they don't want to give power to by naming. You might hear them say other words, but I don't use them. I can't tell you what you saw, but you did the right thing leaving. What happened to the fisherman? I asked. Moved away. Didn't come back. He rang up the coffee. Some places are older than us. Some things were here first. We're just passing through their territory, and mostly they don't care. But sometimes. He trailed off, shaking his head. I didn't correct him or ask for his version. I paid and walked back to the car, the coffee hot in my hand but my fingers still cold. My wife met my eyes in that brief moment parents have when they speak without saying words, when you communicate fear and determination and love all at once. I told the kids we'd get breakfast in an hour and that they could pick any place they wanted. Sophia asked if we were going to camp somewhere else. I said, not today, maybe not for a while. We got home early in the afternoon and unloaded fast, almost frantically. The normalcy of our neighborhood, the mailbox, the familiar houses, the sound of a lawnmower felt overwhelming in its ordinariness. How could this world exist alongside what we'd seen? How could both be real? The tent stayed in the garage for a week because I couldn't bring myself to set it up in the yard and wash it down. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the sound of footsteps in the dirt, the wrongness of that face in my flashlight beam. Little things set me off those first few days. A jacket hanging on a door that looked, for just a second, like someone standing there. My son taking a few seconds too long to answer when I called his name from another room, those seconds stretching into eternity before I heard his voice. The way shadows fell in the hallway at night. The sound of footsteps on the stairs that stopped and started with odd rhythm. My brain kept replaying the eyelids, moving the wrong direction. That smooth, mechanical lift from bottom to top. I'd be doing something normal, washing dishes, reading a report, driving, and the image would flash across my mind with perfect clarity. The stretched skin around the copied scar, the two white eyes, the jaw opening too wide. I tried to find an explanation I could live with. A person messing with us, but why? And how did they disappear so completely? Drugs, but I hadn't smelled anything, and the movements were too purposeful. A mask, but masks don't move like that, don't blink like that, don't run like that. The speed from motionless to gone, and the absence of normal reflexes, wrecked those theories. Some nights I'd lie awake running through the logic, trying to find the crack in my perception that would let reality back in. Maybe I'd been half asleep. Maybe my mind had filled in details that weren't there. Maybe the stress of work and family had created a hallucination so vivid it felt real. But then I'd remember my wife had been awake too. Miguel had seen it. The footprints had been there in the dirt, physical and measurable. Miguel changed after that trip. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would show up on a report card. But I noticed. He started checking the windows at night before bed, making sure they were locked. He began sleeping with his door cracked open so the hall light came through. He stopped wanting to go anywhere isolated when his friends suggested hiking or camping. He always had an excuse. One night about 2 weeks after we got back, I found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m., just standing there in the dark. Couldn't sleep, he said when I turned on the light. His eyes looked haunted, older than 15. Do you want to talk about what we saw? I asked. He shook his head. Then, after a long pause, do you think it's still there? I don't know, I said, which was honest. But it's not here. It's not following us. How do you know? I didn't have an answer for that. Because we're okay, I said finally. We're home. We're safe. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't quite believe me. I'm not sure I believed myself. Sophia started having nightmares. She'd wake up crying, saying she dreamed about faces that looked wrong, about people who stood too still. My wife would hold her, and I'd sit on the edge of the bed, and we'd wait for her breathing to even out. We never talked about Blue Water Lake in front of the kids, but they knew. They'd lived through it too. My wife and I agreed on that in the car without saying it, that silent communication that comes from years together. We haven't been back to Blue Water Lake. We still camp, but not there, and not near that kind of tree line, isolated, dense, the kind where you can't see past the first row of trunks. We choose sites closer to ranger stations now, places with families nearby, lots of noise and light. I don't keep this to myself in some mystical way. When friends talk about camping in New Mexico, I tell them to pick other sites and other parks. If they insist on Blue Water Lake, I tell them to choose a spot closer to other families, preferably on the southern loop. I tell them to leave if anything feels off, even if it's just one wrong step in the dirt at 2 a.m. Most people laugh it off, think I'm being paranoid or trying to scare them. But occasionally someone hears something in my voice and takes me seriously. They nod slowly and ask what I saw. I tell them, plain and simple, without embellishment. A face that looked like my son but wasn't. Movement that wasn't human. Eyes that blinked the wrong way. They usually go quiet after that. I've done research since then, carefully, not wanting to fall down conspiracy rabbit holes, but needing to know if anyone else had seen what we saw. You find things if you look forum posts from people who swear they encountered something similar, archived news articles about abandoned campsites, vague references in local history to places where people avoid camping even when the spot looks perfect. There's a thread that runs through a lot of the accounts. The mimic quality, the way these things, whatever they are, wear familiar faces, like they're trying to understand us by copying our shapes, but they don't quite get it right. The mechanics are wrong. The soul is missing. It's uncanny valley made flesh, or whatever passes for flesh. Every August, when the nights hold heat later than they should and air sits heavy after midnight, I remember the quiet of that campsite, the beam of light, the face at the tree line that blinked from the bottom up, the sound of footsteps that were too deliberate, too measured, the speed of something moving between stillness and motion without the transition. I don't know what to call it beyond what locals call it. Those who've been in the area long enough to know there are things that don't have proper names. I'm not interested in chasing it or proving anything. I don't want to go back and gather evidence. I don't want photographs or recordings. I wanted a simple weekend away with my family, and I got a clear line I won't cross again. The thing is, life goes on. We camp in other places, make new memories, watch the kids grow. Miguel is starting to think about college now. Sophia is into basketball, all elbows and energy. My wife and I plan trips, shorter ones, safer ones. We grill in the backyard and tell ourselves this is enough. And mostly, it is. But sometimes, late at night when everyone else is asleep, I think about that moment when the thing ran into the trees. The impossible speed, the way it moved in a straight line like physics didn't apply. I think about what it wanted, why it was there, what would have happened if I'd stepped closer or called out to it differently. I think about the footprints in the dirt that matched my son's shoes but weren't made by his weight. I think about the way it studied me, head tilted, learning. I think about all the people who've camped in that spot since, all the families who've set up their tents in that quiet site on the northern loop. I wonder if they've seen anything. I wonder if it's still there, waiting at the edge of the light, practicing its human movements, getting better at the mimicry. The park is still open. People still camp there. The reviews online are mostly good, beautiful sunsets, great fishing, peaceful nights. A few mention feeling watched, or hearing footsteps, or seeing shadows that move wrong, but those are easy to dismiss. Every isolated place has stories. Every dark stretch of forest generates fear. What I know for certain is this: there are things that live in the spaces we don't control, in the wild places we visit but don't truly understand. Most of the time we pass through without incident. We take our pictures, cook our meals, and go home with nothing but good memories. But sometimes, rarely, we encounter something that reminds us we're not the only ones out there. If you camp at Blue Water Lake on the northern loop, and you wake to heavy steps and a shape at the edge of your sight that looks like someone you know, don't talk to it. Don't try to get a closer look. Don't test it or challenge it. Wake your family, be calm, and leave in the morning. Don't run, that might trigger something, but don't stay either. That's not fear talking. That's respect for something that was there before we were and doesn't care if we believe in it. That's acknowledgement that the world is bigger and stranger than we like to admit. That's a father protecting his family the only way he knows how, by sharing what he learned so others don't have to learn it themselves. I still have the stones Sophia picked up that morning, the ones I retrieved while standing over those wrong footprints. They sit on a shelf in my garage, ordinary rocks from an ordinary place. Sometimes I pick one up and feel the weight of it, solid and real. I remind myself that what happened was real too, that I'm not crazy, that my family saw what I saw. And then I put the rock back and close the garage door and go inside where the lights are bright and my family is safe and the world makes sense again. Until the next August, when the heat sits heavy after midnight and I remember the quiet and the light and the face that blinked wrong. We survived. We learned. We left. That's all you can do sometimes. Learn where the lines are and don't cross them. Know when you're in a place that doesn't belong to you and respect what was there first. And if something stands at the edge of your campsite wearing a face you recognize but don't quite believe, trust your instincts and leave. Because some things don't have explanations. Some experiences don't fit into the world we've built with science and reason and comfortable certainties, and that's okay. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to survive it and keep your family safe and know when to walk away. That's what I did. That's what I'm telling you to do if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. Listen to that ancient part of your brain that knows when something is wrong, that recognizes threat even when it comes wearing a familiar face. Trust yourself, trust your fear, and leave before you learn what happens to people who stay. I work for U.S. Border Patrol, which raises questions when I mention Monument Valley. Most people associate my agency with the southern border, the desert sprawl of Texas and California. But last July, I found myself in Kayenta, Arizona, on what started as a routine break that morphed into a training attachment with Navajo Nation police. We were running traffic interdiction drills and coordination exercises, the kind of interagency work that keeps communication channels open and procedures aligned. I'd driven U.S. Route 163 between Kayenta and Oljato Monument Valley dozens of times by that point. I could navigate it half asleep, listing every pullout, cattle guard, and scenic overlook without consulting a map. The highway has a rhythm to it. Long straightaways where the mittens rise from the desert floor like monuments to geology itself, punctuated by gentle curves that feel almost apologetic for interrupting the view. Summer driving suited me best. Tourist traffic thinned during the brutal afternoon hours when temperatures climbed past 100 degrees. Most visitors retreated to air-conditioned hotels or restaurants, leaving the highway open for those of us who had business to conduct. That particular afternoon started without ceremony. I topped off my fuel tank at the large station on the north edge of Kayenta around 2:30. The sun hammered down with the kind of intensity that makes asphalt shimmer and mirages dance on the horizon. I set my AC to maximum, cracked the windows just enough to bleed off the accumulated heat, and checked my phone. A text from Sergeant Bernard Whitehorse of the NNP confirmed our morning session had been logged and filed. He mentioned they'd be running a small sobriety checkpoint near Oljato later that evening, timed to coincide with a community gathering. If you come back through, swing wide toward the cones and we'll wave you by, his message read. Standard courtesy between law enforcement. I typed back a quick acknowledgement, pocketed my phone, and pulled out onto the highway. The road north leaves Kayenta with an ease that always helped me decompress. The town falls away quickly, replaced by the vast openness that defines this part of Arizona. Red rock formations rose in the distance, their shadows sharp against the brilliant sky. A few miles up, I passed the Forrest Gump Point pullout, predictably crowded with rental cars. Tourists knelt in the center line, phones extended, chasing that iconic photograph. I rolled past without slowing, settling into the comfortable isolation of a long, empty highway stretch. My radio sat quiet. Dispatch handled calls for sectors farther south. Out here, in coordination with tribal police, we maintained a lighter presence. No traffic appeared in my rearview mirror. Nothing materialized ahead except heat shimmer and road, the kind of peaceful emptiness that lets your mind wander while your hands and eyes handle the mechanical task of driving. I thought about dinner plans, about the report I needed to finish that evening, about whether I'd have time to call my mother before she went to bed in her Eastern time zone. The dashboard clock read 2:47 p.m. when everything changed. Distance deceives in the desert. Objects appear closer or farther depending on heat distortion and the quality of light. When I first spotted the shape in my lane, my brain cataloged it automatically. Coyote, standing still, probably disoriented by heat or illness. Not unusual. Wildlife encounters happened regularly on these remote stretches. The protocol was simple. Slow down, give them space, let them move off the road. I eased off the accelerator, dropping from 60 to 45, then to 30. The shape didn't move. I tapped my horn twice, a courtesy warning. Nothing. The animal remained fixed in place, centered in my lane with deliberate precision. That's when my training kicked into a higher gear. I unlatched my holster, not drawing but making my sidearm accessible, and continued rolling forward at reduced speed. 30 yards became 20. Details emerged that contradicted my initial assessment. The rib cage looked elongated, stretched beyond normal canine proportions. The hips sat at an angle that seemed anatomically wrong, rotated off their natural axis. The forelegs hung forward in a posture that suggested weight distribution incompatible with four-legged locomotion. Every instinct I'd developed over years of field work started sending urgent signals. This wasn't right. At 15 yards, it moved. Not away from the truck, not toward the shoulder. It rose. The motion defied every pattern I'd observed in wildlife. Bears rear up to catch scent on the wind, to intimidate threats, to gain a better vantage point. This wasn't that. This thing straightened like a person standing from a crouch, knees tracking inward, arms hanging with elbows flared at angles no human shoulder joint could accommodate. The muzzle remained elongated, distinctly canine, but the eyes performed an action that turned my stomach. They tracked me. Not with head movements, not with the whole body pivots animals use. The eyes themselves moved in their sockets, following my truck's approach with small, precise corrections. Watching me watch it, I've stared down armed suspects, faced dangerous animals, worked scenes that would give most people nightmares. Nothing prepared me for the intelligence in that gaze, the calculated assessment happening behind those eyes. I brought my truck to a complete stop 5 yards short. My engine idled. The AC fan clicked through its cycle. The interior suddenly felt cramped, the windows too large, the locks inadequate. We remained frozen in that tableau for what felt like minutes but probably measured only seconds. My hand drifted toward my sidearm, not gripping it but acknowledging its presence. My other hand stayed on the wheel, knuckles white. Then it spoke my name. Not a sound resembling my name, not a vocalization I could rationalize as coincidence. It said my first name with perfect clarity, with the exact inflection my mother uses when she wants my attention but hasn't escalated to anger yet. The same spacing between syllables, the same slight drop on the final vowel, the same tone that had called me to dinner 10,000 times across 34 years. Hearing that voice emerge from something standing in the middle of U.S. Route 163 inches, full daylight, under a sun so bright it hurt to look at, created a cognitive dissonance my mind struggled to process. Every rational explanation I tried to construct crumbled against the evidence of my own ears. I'm not prone to panic. My job requires steady nerves and clear thinking under pressure. But in that moment, with that voice hanging in the superheated air between us, I made the only decision that felt survivable. I went. No hesitation, no second guessing. I slammed the transmission into drive, floored the accelerator, and aimed to split the lane, giving myself maximum clearance on both sides. The truck surged forward. The thing stood motionless until the last possible instant, then moved with a jerky uncertainty, like it couldn't decide which direction to commit to. The bumper struck it with a sound I'll never forget, a rubbery thud without the sharp crack of breaking bone, without the wet impact of flesh giving way. Wrong. Everything about the collision felt wrong. My grill caught something in the impact. Through the windshield, I glimpsed pale hair, wispy and fine like undercoat, spreading across the hood's leading edge. I didn't allow myself to look at it. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, foot pressing the accelerator down, speedometer climbing, 30, 40, 50, 60. The rearview mirror betrayed me. I couldn't help but glance. In 2 heartbeats, it was upright again, standing in the road where I'd left it, except now it was moving, running. The initial stride looked disjointed, limbs seeking coordination, joints finding angles that shouldn't work but did. Then, with horrifying speed, the movement smoothed out. Whatever governed its locomotion was learning, adjusting, optimizing. Each stride became more efficient than the last, closing the gap my truck had opened. I forced my eyes back to the road. The Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park entrance appeared on my right. the small attendant booth with its friendly ranger raising a hand in greeting as I passed. My hazard lights blinked twice, reflexive muscle memory from years of signaling fellow officers. I didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't key my radio to report what even I didn't fully believe was happening. The wheel stayed steady under my hands. Hot desert air punched through the window crack with each gust. Wind noise filled the cab, a rushing static that should have drowned out everything else. But underneath it, when the road dipped or curved just right, I caught another sound, a rhythmic slap of footfall, hard and fast, timing itself to my speed with mechanical precision. When I eased off for a curve, the sound drew closer. When I accelerated on straightaways, it fell back but never disappeared entirely. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't auditory pareidolia, finding patterns in random noise. This was something pacing my vehicle at highway speeds, adjusting its rhythm to match mine, maintaining a pursuit that defied every law of biology I understood. I made quick decisions without conscious thought. Doors locked already were, force of habit. Windows up, cranked them closed despite the AC struggling to compensate. Eyes forward except on the longest straightaways where a glance in the mirror wouldn't compromise my safety. The shoulder offered no refuge, just a soft apron of sand and scattered scrub that would bog my truck instantly. I stayed centered in my lane, maintaining speed, trusting the machine under me more than anything else in that moment. The highway between the tribal park and Mexican Hat follows the landscape's natural contours, offering few opportunities for sustained straight-line driving. Each gentle curve cut my rear-view visibility, creating gaps where I lost sight of whatever followed me. But on one particular dogleg, I feathered my brakes, deliberately slowing just enough to force a reveal. The thing appeared in my rear glass, too tall for a coyote by at least a foot, too narrow through the torso for any human I'd ever seen. The elbows jutted outward at those impossible angles, and the hands, if you could call them hands, seemed to have too many joints, articulating in ways that made my own fingers ache in sympathy. But what seized my attention, what welded itself into my memory with crystalline clarity, was the movement itself. It ran with the focused power of an athlete finding their rhythm, each stride more economical than the last. The initial awkwardness had vanished, replaced by a terrible efficiency. This wasn't a creature chasing prey on instinct. This was something learning, adapting, improving its technique in real time. The curve swept my view away before I could process more, and I accelerated hard into the straight. My training emphasized threat assessment and response prioritization. In any pursuit situation, you evaluate capability, intent, and opportunity. Capability. This thing had demonstrated it could keep pace with a vehicle traveling at highway speeds. Intent. It had called my name, struck my truck, and now followed with singular focus. Opportunity. The open highway provided it with every advantage, visibility, space, and no obstacles between us. Standard pursuit protocols became irrelevant. I couldn't call for backup without sounding insane. I couldn't engage without understanding what I faced. I couldn't stop without making myself vulnerable in ways I didn't want to contemplate. The only rational option was to keep moving, maintain distance, and reach a populated area where witnesses and support would be available. The San Juan River Valley announced itself through a change in elevation, the highway descending like a gentle ramp toward lower ground. Mexican Hat waited at the bottom, a small cluster of buildings and businesses that suddenly represented safety in a way I'd never appreciated before. Traffic built around me, 2 RVs lumbering along, a pickup truck with out-of-state plates, a small tour bus heading back toward the park. The presence of other vehicles seemed to affect whatever pursued me. The footfall sounds faded, lost beneath the normal symphony of traffic noise, or perhaps it had fallen back where terrain offered better concealment. The roadside widened. Commercial signs began appearing with greater frequency. The iconic Mexican Hat Rock turnoff passed on my right, tourists visible at the overlook, taking photographs and stretching their legs. Normal human activity, mundane vacation moments. The contrast with what I'd just experienced created a surreal disconnect that left me feeling unmoored from reality. I pushed past the town itself, watching for a safe place to stop. A wide shoulder with clean sightlines eventually presented itself. I pulled over, set my brake, and sat motionless for 30 seconds, hands still gripping the wheel, breath coming faster than I wanted to admit. My radio had been silent through everything. Now I picked it up and called Sergeant Whitehorse. My voice came out steady. Years of training ensured that much. Emotion and panic were luxuries field agents couldn't afford, especially when making official reports. I outlined the incident in clear, factual language. Coyote positioned in traffic lane, unusual posture and movement, verbal articulation of my name, vehicular impact, sustained pursuit at highway speeds, bumper contact with biological material. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Whitehorse responded with the measured tone of someone filing information against a mental database of previous incidents. Copy that. The checkpoint's active near Oljato now, southbound side. Cones are visible from half a mile out. Come back through. We'll keep things orderly. Turning around felt counterintuitive, like presenting my throat to a predator. But I trusted interagency protocols more than my fear. I found the next safe turnout, reversed direction, and began the drive back north toward Oljato. My speed stayed moderate, just under the limit, conspicuous enough that other drivers would remember seeing me if something went wrong. The checkpoint materialized exactly where Whitehorse had indicated. 2 marked NNP units and a tribal cruiser formed a barrier with traffic cones funneling vehicles into a controlled pattern. A DPS trooper stood beneath a makeshift canopy, and 2 elders sat in lawn chairs positioned in the shade. The scene projected normalcy, the kind of routine traffic stop designed to catch impaired drivers and check paperwork. Boring by design, safe by structure. I pulled in nose first behind a cruiser and engaged my parking brake. The scuff on my bumper caught afternoon light, and embedded in the damaged paint was that pale, wispy residue hair that wasn't quite hair, texture that resisted easy classification. The DPS trooper approached, saw where my attention focused, and nodded once. We'll photograph it, document everything. His face carried that particular expression law enforcement develops over time. Nothing surprises me, but I remain vigilant anyway. Whitehorse emerged from his unit and walked over, movements deliberate and unhurried. Open road or cover? He asked. Open road, I confirmed. Unless it was forced to veer. He nodded as though I'd passed a test. Summer gives us calls out here, more when the heat's heavy like this. We don't chase these things. We set up positions that deny them what they want. Lone vehicles. Partial stops in the wide spaces. We're not going hunting. The checkpoint formed a defensive perimeter using principles I recognized from tactical training. The cones created a chicane that forced slow, steady movement without allowing complete stops. 2 units idled facing north with their spotlights aimed low, not for illumination but to eliminate shadows where something could approach unseen. A 3rd patrol car positioned itself at a scenic overlook to the south, watching the approach road with clear sightlines. The elders were politely asked to relocate behind the line of vehicles. Nobody explained why. They moved without protest, settling into different chairs with thermoses of coffee and patient expressions that suggested this wasn't their first unusual checkpoint. Whitehorse distributed simple instructions to everyone present. No pursuit if something appears, no heroics, hard barriers between any threat and civilians, clean exit routes maintained at all times. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Traffic flowed through the checkpoint with practiced ease. A few tourists slowed to stare, probably assuming they'd stumbled onto a sobriety crackdown or document inspection. Officers waved them through with professional courtesy, and each vehicle disappeared down the highway without incident. The heat created distortion on the northern straightaway, making distance difficult to judge. I found myself studying those heat waves, trying to separate normal refraction from actual movement. My mouth had gone dry. The water I'd drunk in Mexican Hat felt like a distant memory. I didn't trust myself to open a bottle without my hands shaking, so I stayed still, watching, waiting. The shimmer deepened around a shape that resolved too slowly to be a vehicle. It held position first, motionless for a span of time that felt calculated, then stepped forward twice. The torso rotated in a demonstration of flexibility no human spine could achieve, joints articulating through ranges of motion that looked anatomically impossible. It didn't approach the cone line, maintained distance that felt deliberate, measured. From our position, probably 80 yards out, the proportions registered as fundamentally wrong. Height in an uncanny valley between human and animal, shoulders too narrow, head shape that didn't conform to any natural profile. I tightened my jaw until my molars ached, forcing myself to breathe through my nose, maintaining control through deliberate physical discipline. My hands stayed visible at my sides, away from my weapon, demonstrating no aggressive intent. Around me, the other officers mirrored the same posture. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved unnecessarily. A tour bus entered the checkpoint from the south, the driver following hand signals with professional precision. The bus rolled through the cone corridor at the prescribed crawl, and as its rear end cleared the northern cones, The shape moved. Not toward us, not in pursuit of the bus. It shifted left, tracked parallel to the fence line toward low brush, dropped to all fours with fluid grace, and vanished into the landscape without disturbing the air. We held formation for 30 minutes after it disappeared. Traffic continued its steady flow. Tourists passed through, oblivious to what had just occurred. The checkpoint remained active. Cones stayed in place. Officers maintained their positions. When you're trained in risk assessment, you don't dismantle a system that's working just to satisfy curiosity or prove courage. Boring was good. Boring meant everyone went home intact. Back at the NNP substation in Kayenta that evening, I sat in a borrowed office chair and wrote the incident report with meticulous attention to detail. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air conditioning cycled through its programmed intervals. Shift change flowed around me. Officers coming and going, voices rising and falling in the comfortable rhythm of routine work. I structured the report exactly as academy training had taught me. Date, time, route designation, approximate mile marker, factual description of events without speculation or interpretation. Contact with unknown bipedal entity standing in traffic lane. Impact with vehicle bumper at low speed. Pursuit on foot at sustained highway speed. Arrival at checkpoint. Visual confirmation of entity presence at distance. No injuries sustained. No property damage beyond cosmetic scuffing to vehicle bumper. No weapons discharged. No pursuit initiated per tactical protocols. I attached the digital photographs of my bumper damage, high-resolution images that captured the scuff marks and the pale residue embedded in the paint. Whitehorse filed the report next to a slim folder containing similar entries, summer incidents from the same corridor stretching back several years. He added a line to the roll call notes. U.S. Route 163 between Kayenta and Oljato. Avoid solitary stops in open straightaways during peak heat hours. Route traffic through controlled checkpoints when possible. The DPS logged the photographs into their database and coded the incident to our training event, ensuring it wouldn't get lost in bureaucratic limbo or dismissed as rumor. Official documentation provided protection not from what we'd encountered, but from accusations of paranoia or fabrication later. Paper trails matter in law enforcement. They establish patterns, validate concerns, justify procedural changes. A mechanic from the local tow shop arrived with cleaning supplies and buffing compound. I watched him work the bumper, watched the pale residue come away reluctantly on his rag, fibers that seemed to resist separation from the paint. When he finished, the bumper looked like any other vehicle that had endured years of desert driving, scratched, worn, unremarkable. I paid him cash, thanked him for the after-hours service, and walked back inside where coffee waited and fluorescent normalcy provided illusion of safety. The next morning, I drove a different route. Not out of fear, though. Fear would have been rational, but out of operational procedure. AZ 98 toward Page for a coordination handoff, then back via U.S. Route 160, skirting the area entirely. No announcement, no dramatic explanation. Personnel adjustments happen constantly in law enforcement. You modify patrol patterns based on developing information and resource availability. My route change received no comment because it didn't warrant comment. A week later, Whitehorse sent a text. No incidents since cones started earlier in the day. The checkpoint schedule had been adjusted, beginning operations at 2 p.m. instead of evening hours. The change appeared organic, part of normal seasonal adjustments to traffic patterns. They maintained the checkpoint through August weekends, then rotated south when community event schedules shifted. People attended their gatherings and drove home without encountering anything except pavement and conversation. I continued my training attachment for another 3 weeks before rotating back to my normal sector. During that time, I drove Route 163 exactly once, during morning hours with heavy tourist traffic, as part of a 2-vehicle convoy with an NNP officer. Nothing unusual occurred. The road remained a road. The landscape remained spectacular. Tourists took their photographs, purchased their souvenirs, and departed with vacation memories untainted by anything they couldn't explain. When people ask what I think happened, and they do ask, because official reports generate informal questions, I answer with observable facts. In full daylight on U.S. Route 163, I encountered an entity that exhibited bipedal posture with anatomical features inconsistent with known wildlife. It vocalized my name with accuracy that suggested prior knowledge. It pursued my vehicle at speeds exceeding normal biological capabilities. We responded by implementing traffic control measures that denied it access to isolated targets, and subsequent incidents decreased to zero. The professional term varies depending on who you ask. Tribal officers use the word their culture provides. Federal agents prefer unidentified biological entity or unknown wildlife encounter. Tourists occasionally report strange animals or unusual sightings that get filed and forgotten. The terminology matters less than the response protocol. Don't stop alone in open terrain during peak heat. Maintain traffic flow through controlled checkpoints. Document everything. Adjust procedures based on pattern recognition. I drove that straight stretch one final time in September before my rotation ended. The sky held that crystalline clarity autumn brings, and temperatures had backed off to comfortable ranges. The pullouts bustled with visitors again, families navigating between vehicles, photographers capturing the iconic views. The cone stack sat ready near Old Jado, pre-staged for rapid deployment if needed. A Navajo officer waved pedestrians across the highway, and traffic flowed without any single vehicle stuck alone in the wide open spaces. The highway looked like a highway. That's the ending that validates our response. We identified a pattern, implemented countermeasures, and continued operations with modifications that prioritize safety without abandoning our responsibilities. Nobody got hurt. The road remained functional. And in law enforcement, those outcomes represent success regardless of how unusual the precipitating incident might have been. I keep the photographs on my phone, time-stamped and geotagged, evidence that documents without explaining. Sometimes late at night, when sleep proves elusive and my mind reviews the day's events, I pull them up and study the pale residue in my bumper scuff. I remember the sound of my name spoken in my mother's voice by something that wasn't my mother. I remember the calculated intelligence in those tracking eyes, the adaptive pursuit that improved with each stride. And I remember the fundamental lesson that experience taught me. Some phenomena exist outside our current frameworks of understanding, and the appropriate response isn't denial or reckless investigation but pragmatic adaptation. We encounter what we encounter. We document it accurately, we modify our procedures to protect people, and we continue doing the work, because roads need patrolling regardless of what occasionally stands in the middle of them. The next time I visit Monument Valley, and I will visit, because it's within my jurisdiction and my duties don't accommodate permanent avoidance, I'll drive during populated hours, maintain communication with local officers, and respect the protocols we established. Not because I'm afraid, though healthy fear serves legitimate purposes, but because procedure exists for reasons that don't always fit on training slides or policy documents. Out here, where desert meets sky and vistas that humble human perspective, we've learned to share the landscape with things that predate our presence and will persist after we're gone. The accommodation isn't comfortable, it isn't neat, but it works, and in my line of work, that's the standard that matters most. I had been planning this backpacking trip for weeks before the autumn weather turned volatile. Late September meant the temperature would cooperate, the crowds would thin, and the trails through the ridge country would still be passable before the winter storms made everything treacherous. My cousin Paul and I had done dozens of trips together over the years, nothing elaborate, nothing extreme, just two people who understood how to move through wilderness quietly and respect what the landscape demanded of us. We arrived at the trailhead near Hemlock Lodge at Natural Bridge State Resort Park on a Friday afternoon, the sky already bruising gray at the edges. The parking area was nearly empty. I remember noticing how few cars had ventured out this late in the season, as if the place itself discouraged lingering. We went into the small outfitter shop in town first to grab supplies we'd forgotten. That's where the clerk said it. He was older, maybe mid-60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades on those ridges. When I asked about the best camping spots along the trail, his hand stopped moving across the counter. He slid a paper map toward me with 2 fingers, not quite meeting my eyes. "Don't camp in the rock shelters," he said. His tone wasn't conversational. It carried the weight of instruction, the kind of thing said because it needed saying, regardless of how it sounded. I asked why. The answer he gave wasn't really an answer at all. He told me some people talked about something that stayed to the hollows, something that didn't cross into firelight. He delivered this information the way you'd state a rule about tide times or snow load thresholds, factual, neutral, and non-negotiable. He wasn't joking. I watched his face to make sure, and he wasn't. Paul laughed in the car, the way you do when someone tells you something absurd. He said it was local folklore, the kind of ghost story people repeated to make the place feel important. I agreed with him at the time because that was easier than sitting with the alternative. We both preferred to sleep under open sky anyway, we told ourselves. Storms could change plans in rock shelters. We were being practical, not running from anything. The hike in was uneventful until it wasn't. We followed the marked trail system with its turtle blazes and the numbered posts that marked distance. The sandstone cuts grew deeper as we climbed, the roots slicker where water had worked at them for decades. By mid-afternoon, the humidity had become oppressive, the kind that makes your clothes stick to your skin and your breathing feel labored even on flat ground. Then the wind changed. I felt it first, a pressure shift that made the trees around us move in unison. The clouds didn't gradually thicken, they seemed to collapse downward all at once. Within minutes, what had been a gray afternoon became a thing with teeth. The rain didn't start as drops. It came like someone had turned on a faucet in the sky without a nozzle, the kind of downpour that fills your boots while you're still running for cover. The creek beside the trail swelled visibly, transforming from a gentle flow into something aggressive and churning. The path turned to a slick ribbon, and within seconds I couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. We were near a shallow sandstone overhang when it became clear we couldn't push forward. The shelter was maybe 12 feet deep, with a stone ceiling that rose about 7 feet at the mouth. The floor was relatively dry, covered with packed sand and small stones. On the back wall, old blackened scorch marks traced patterns where fires had been built decades ago, maybe longer. Someone had left initials carved into the stone R.H. 1987, and I stared at those letters for longer than was rational, wondering what that person thought they were immortalizing. The sign at the junction had been explicit, no shelter camping, but the rain was absolute now, and the wind carried spray that would soak through anything exposed. We made the choice quickly. Paul brought the fire kit while I unpacked the tarp, rigging it so the cooktop would sit protected but centered, visible from both sides of our refuge. The warmth from the small flames pushed back against the wet that was trying to seep into everything we'd brought. We cooked noodles. It should have been routine. I boiled water while Paul organized our sleeping gear, pulling our bags to the deepest part of the shelter where the stone angles up. Our socks hung from a cord strung between two natural stone protrusions, dripping steadily. The heat from our jackets rose up as we sat near the fire, steam lifting off the wet fabric. I checked the map. The plan was simple now. Wait out the storm, eat, try to rest if the noise allowed it, and leave before first light. We were not doing anything special or dangerous. We were just two people taking shelter from weather that had turned hostile. I remember Paul saying something about being glad we'd made this trip before November, when the real cold came. He was trying to normalize the situation, I think. Or I was. One of us was trying to make this seem routine. That's when we heard the steps. The sound didn't announce itself with the typical forest vocabulary. No snapping twigs, no rustling that grew louder as something approached. Instead, there was a steady tread on the wet leaves outside the shelter mouth, deliberate and measured. It moved in a circle pattern, and I realized it was working angles, repositioning itself to see what we had arranged inside our small refuge. The footsteps stopped exactly where the firelight began to thin, at the edge of visibility. Then came silence, not the peaceful kind that comes after noise fades naturally. This was intentional silence, the kind a person makes when they're holding perfectly still, controlling their breathing, maintaining a position with effort. The back of my neck went rigid with the recognition that something conscious was standing just outside our light, observing. A woman's voice came from the darkness, clear, normal, the kind of casual tone you'd use asking a neighbor for spare sugar. "Do you have any water?" I did something I'm not proud of, though I'm not sure what else I should have done. I took a water bottle from our supply and slid it toward the edge of the firelight, partially because it felt like the decent thing to do, partially because I needed to see what hands would reach in and claim it. No hands came. No shape stepped forward. The bottle sat at the border between light and darkness for what felt like a minute but was probably only seconds. Then I heard the sound of plastic scraping against the wet sand and grit at the shelter floor. I pulled the bottle back with a sudden jerking motion that Paul reacted to with alarm. The cap was still tight. The scuff mark I'd put into the plastic months ago, back during a solo trip to this exact region, was still there in the same place. The bottle had not been opened. It had not been touched. Yet it had clearly moved. Paul met my eyes across the fire, and I saw the moment he realized what I'd already understood. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We let the fire sink down to coals, and without discussion, we both got into our sleeping bags fully clothed, boots still laced tight. The rain continued its steady percussion against the stone lip above us, and I lay in the darkness counting my own breaths because it was better than listening to whatever was happening just beyond the reach of our dead fire. I waited for the sounds that would indicate departure. A person leaving would create sound, brushing through undergrowth, shifting weight, the rustling of clothing and gear. Normal human movement is impossible to completely silence. None of those sounds came. The forest seemed to hold its attention, as if whatever was outside recognized that we were aware of it now and had adjusted its behavior accordingly. When I couldn't bear the silence anymore, I fed small sticks into the coals until the flames began to edge back into the clearing. The fire needed to be between us and whatever occupied the space beyond our shelter. Paul leaned close, barely moving his mouth, and said something that stopped my heart for the second time that night. He'd seen a face between the trees during one of the flame flares. He described it using careful words, as if precision might somehow make it make sense. He said it looked like someone we both knew from town, Kayla, the girl who'd worked at the outdoor shop and had since moved away. Same eyes, he said, just stretched thin at the jaw, elongated. I told him he was mixing shadows and stress into faces, that the firelight played tricks, that his mind was building narratives to explain something that had a simple explanation. Even as I said it, I didn't believe it. He didn't either. The voice came back. This time it was closer, maybe only 4 or 5 feet from the shelter mouth. The tone remained friendly, conversational, utterly untouched by the strangeness of the situation. City boys always bring too much gear, it said. The exact words Paul had used in the car on the drive up. The exact inflection, complete with the way he emphasized the second syllable of always. The same tone that carried a hint of judgment wrapped in camaraderie. Paul sat up sharply. "Who's there?" he called out. His voice cracked on the second word. Leaves shifted in response. Something moved away from the shelter mouth, but not far. Instead of retreating, it seemed to be repositioning. Then the voice began listing our supplies. Not in the way a thief catalogs what they're about to steal, but with the casual familiarity of someone who'd handled each item personally. It said we'd brought the old backpack with the missing brass pin on the left hip belt. It identified the Nalgene water bottle by the melted letters on the rim letters that spelled a name I had never shared with anyone. It named my grandfather's knife with such precision that I felt my hands go cold. A knife with a specific wear pattern on the handle, a small dent where the blade met the spine from a cooking accident years ago, a crack in the leather sheath that I'd never had repaired because it felt important to leave evidence of that particular failure intact. I had never posted any of these details. I had never told anyone outside my immediate family about that knife. The weight of its knowledge, spoken casually from the darkness, did something to my nervous system I'm still processing. Fear is one thing. This was something else, a violation so fundamental that my mind struggled to construct a framework for it. A man's voice came next, answering from a different location in the darkness. It used my father's cadence, his rhythms, the way he puts emphasis on the last syllable of my name when he's being stern with me. The voice told me to check the weather twice. My father says this to me every time I trip. My aunt's laugh came after that, tucked into the middle of a sentence telling Paul to save his batteries. Back and forth, the voices accumulated, friendly and familiar, voices of people I'd known my entire life, all coming from the darkness just beyond our shelter, layered one over another until they created a chorus that should have been impossible. We pushed damp sticks onto the coals with increasing desperation, trying to force the light outward farther with each addition. The shelter became hotter and more crowded with smoke. In one sudden flare, as the fire caught fresh wood, I saw something that erased any remaining doubt about what we were dealing with. There was a shape low to the ground, just beyond the furthest reach of the light. The detail I caught was enough and too much at once. I saw hands pressed to the earth, elbows angled high, knees bent outward. It held this position with the precision of an athlete, but there was something deeply wrong about the geometry of it. It looked like a person performing an imitation of an animal, and it had held the position so still and so long that the earth where it touched had begun to collect moisture in the depression. When an ember snapped and flew toward its knuckles, it didn't flinch. Instead, it turned its head too slowly, with movements that suggested joints with a different range of motion than human joints possess, and a mouth opened. The grin that emerged held too many teeth. Not a natural expression, not a yawn. A grin that belonged to something that knew grins could communicate something about intention, and had decided to try the shape on. "Which bag has the fuel?" it asked in Mark's voice. Then without transition, "Did you pack the orange rain fly?" in my mother's voice. Then, "Don't move," in my own voice. Perfect inflection, perfect emphasis. A command that came from my own throat despite my standing frozen with my hands shaking. We moved anyway, because not moving had become impossible. We moved slowly, keeping our headlamp low, trying to maintain some advantage of illumination. The thing stayed just at the edge of the brightest ring of our light, learning the boundary, sliding whenever we slid, matching our movements with a patience that suggested it understood we were eventually going to make a mistake. It didn't rush. I came to understand that rushing wasn't part of its strategy. Pressure does things to people, makes them careless, makes them run in directions that put them in worse situations. It let pressure build like water behind a dam, letting us feel the weight of its presence, letting us understand that it was content to move slowly and deliberately toward whatever outcome it had decided was optimal. We kept the fire on our right shoulder and worked our way toward where the shelter's interior gave way to the trail system. Our gear we'd already decided without speaking would stay behind. We took one bag between us, nothing free-handed, nothing that would slow our movement if we needed to move fast. We reached the trail that led upward toward the stone steps beneath the arch, toward the parking area, toward civilization and streetlights, and the ranger station. I don't love hiking at night. The experience of moving through darkness on an unfamiliar path, trusting only to the small circle of light your headlamp creates, triggers something ancient in human consciousness. But that night, ascending wet stone steps with something behind us that moved with deliberate purpose, night hiking became the preferable option. The steps were steep, worn smooth by decades of feet. Water had collected in the crevices where the stone pieces met each other. Our boots slipped continuously despite our attempts to find purchase on the ridges. The climb hurt in the specific way that adrenaline masks initially but promises to make you pay for later. My calves burned. My thighs trembled with each step upward. The shape followed at an even walking pace, tall when it stood upright, dropping to hands and feet to cover ground faster at the switchbacks. Every time our headlamp angled away to check the path ahead, it claimed another half stride of distance. When we stopped briefly at a junction marker to confirm our direction, I heard it exhale, a sound somewhere between a breath and a hiss, from a place that felt too close. It tilted its head as if measuring the precise distance it could maintain while staying just outside the beam of our light. "You forgot your spoon," it said in Paul's voice when he'd accidentally dropped our cheap camping utensil at a switchback 2 turns before. The spoon sat there in the darkness, barely visible if you angled the headlamp just right. We didn't pick it up. Going back was unthinkable. But also, something about the way it had spoken, the observation suggested it wanted us to look at that spoon, wanted our attention divided, wanted us to understand that it could observe even the details we weren't consciously tracking. At the next switchback, both of our mother's names came out of its mouth simultaneously, not in the back-and-forth pattern that had characterized the voices before. Both names, both distinct, occupying the same space from the same mouth at the same moment. It created an acoustic impossibility that my brain couldn't parse. I froze because something in my neural processing threw up a wall. This wasn't fear, it was the raw sensation of encountering something that violated the basic rules of what sound and vocal anatomy should allow. Paul grabbed my sleeve and yanked hard. We kept moving. Stopping would have been surrender. The park's first streetlight appeared ahead like a dull halo on the path. We walked toward it with the kind of purposeful pace that burns energy but doesn't quite become a run. Running invites trips. Running invites falls. Running invites the kind of stumble that puts you at ground level with something moving on hands and feet. The thing tested the streetlight. One bare foot, the toes impossibly long and splayed wide, the nails thick and dirt-packed, extended into the glow. The foot flexed, the toes curling under, pressing into the light as if testing whether it would hurt. After a moment of measurement, the foot pulled back. It set the other foot down where the light stopped and began to pace there, heel to toe, maintaining its position at the boundary between illumination and shadow. We crossed under the light, and I made myself maintain a steady walking pace. Running would break the spell of pretending we were still in control of this situation. The walkway widened as we approached the lodge complex. The single porch light that constantly buzzed with insects was on, and we moved toward it like it was the only real thing left in the world. The shape stayed at the dark edge of the parking lot like something without permission to enter a lit space, rolling its weight from foot to foot. The chorus of voices, all those familiar tones building on each other in the darkness, cut off suddenly, not with a gradual fade, but like someone had flipped a switch. The abruptness of the silence was somehow worse than the voices had been. We stepped into the pool of light beneath the porch and stood there, breathing hard, our bodies pushed to their limit by adrenaline and fear and the desperate focus of survival. A campground host doing his evening rounds came through the parking lot. He looked toward the tree line when he heard the last rustle, saw nothing in the darkness, and didn't make a joke or ask questions. He walked us directly inside and called a ranger without being asked. We went back at first light with the ranger because asking felt less dangerous than the alternative, because not returning felt like some kind of admission of defeat, because we needed to know if what we'd experienced had left evidence that couldn't be explained as natural. The shelter floor showed drag marks, long parallel grooves in the sand, where something had moved with significant weight behind it. The pattern wasn't consistent with deer bedding or a dog's sleeping spot. The marks spoke of elbows and knees pulled through the grit with deliberate force, creating furrows where skin and bone had worked against the earth. Outside the shelter's lip, in the wet leaves and soft ground, the prints were unmistakable. They were bare feet. The toes were extraordinarily long and widely splayed. The dirt was packed so deep under the nails that even the ranger, who'd worked this park for 12 years, made a low sound of discomfort. Each print was longer than my boot, I measured, and the toes pointed inward at the front, the way of a runner whose feet turn in and who still somehow moves with significant speed. The stride length suggested movement that covered ground quickly, but the direction the prints followed didn't make sense to the eye. The path twisted through the forest in a pattern that seemed to optimize for angles of approach that couldn't be seen from the shelter, and the depth of the prints varied in ways that suggested the thing sometimes traveled on hands and feet and sometimes balanced on legs alone. The ranger measured with a tape, took several photographs, and didn't push into the trees to follow the tracks farther. He said to avoid shelter camping and left it at that. No lessons, no stories, just the facts, left where we could see them, and the implicit understanding that some things weren't meant to be pursued. We checked out before breakfast service started. The woman at the desk asked if we wanted coffee for the road. We declined. The drive home happened in silence. Paul stared out the window the entire time. When I tried to talk about what we'd experienced, he didn't respond, and after 3 attempts, I stopped trying. At my house, I cleaned gear like it was a survival task. I wiped the canteen, the old knife, the pots, methodically processing each item with attention that bordered on obsession. I stowed everything in the same places I always did, trying to establish normalcy, trying to convince myself that the world operated according to its usual rules. Then I took my grandfather's knife, put it into a display case I'd never used before, and set that case on the highest shelf I could access in my home. I haven't carried that knife on a trip since. I haven't been able to make myself put it back into a backpack. I went through years of trip reports I'd posted online and methodically removed details, exact camp locations, specific tree formations, private family jokes that served no purpose except to make my writing feel authentic. You don't help something make notes about you. You don't give it a map of your vulnerabilities published in a space where anyone can read it. Paul sold his bivy bag and replaced it with a larger 2-person tent that sets up quickly in tight spaces. He still hikes, but he won't start after sunset. If he's moving and the sun drops, he stops short and camps high, or he turns back entirely. If he's still navigating when dusk hits, he either doubles his pace to reach a defined campsite before dark, or he accepts that this trip ends at the nearest high point where he can see in all directions. I still backpack, but I pick open ground with clean lines of sight and quick exits. I keep a small headlamp in my pocket even when I'm walking through town. I don't camp under rock lips anymore. Stone sheds water and provides shelter, but it also creates angles you can't see into, spaces where something can sit beyond the reach of firelight and wait you out with the patience of something that doesn't experience time the way humans do. If you venture into this region and plan to use the trails north of the arch, respect the signs. Don't camp in the rock shelters. If a storm pushes you toward an overhang or a stone lip, remember that rain passes, and there are locations where you can ride out weather without putting your back against a stone ceiling and something in the dark. If you hear a voice from the edge of your light, and you see no shadow crossing into the glow, don't hand anything over. If a voice near your camp knows things it shouldn't know, specific gear damage, family private jokes, details that mark you as uniquely you, pack tight and walk toward electric light. Firelight slows some things down. Streetlights stop them entirely. That is the only part of this where I feel certain enough to make a claim. People ask me what it was, and I never answer with a label or a name. The word the clerk used exists if you need one. The prints were real. The cap on the bottle was tight. The way 2 voices came out of a single mouth, specific, distinct, simultaneous, is not something I could have imagined to scare myself into hallucination. Believe what you want. Do what you want in those woods. My advice is simple, and it isn't offered as a dare or a challenge. Open ground is safer. Don't camp in the rock shelters. If you hear your own voice behind your back in the darkness, don't turn. Walk to the light and keep walking. Then go home, clean your gear, and change the parts of your routine that leave more of you out there than you meant to leave behind. I grew up in Durango, Colorado, where most nights end with someone suggesting a drive to nowhere. Tyler and I have been those guys since high school, two friends in an old Tacoma, a cooler in the back, and some half-formed plan to shave 15 minutes off a trip by cutting through a section of map that looks empty. We weren't reckless, just casual about risk in the way you get when nothing bad has happened yet. By last July, we'd logged thousands of miles through the Four Corners. We knew where the paved roads ended, which convenience stores stayed open late, and which county lines went quiet after sundown. We also knew the desert near Shiprock can turn from scenic to hostile the minute the sun drops. Knowing a thing and respecting it are not the same. That afternoon we were returning from Gallup. We'd stopped to see a buddy in town and stayed longer than planned, drinking cheap beer on his porch while the afternoon stretched into early evening. The route home was straightforward, Gallup to Shiprock to Farmington to Durango, but the highways were clogged with summer traffic. Campers moved at crawling speeds, rental cars from tourists who'd never driven mountain roads, and somewhere ahead, a wreck had eastbound lanes backed up for miles. Tyler pulled up a mental map and said we could cut northwest on back roads near Shiprock, then reconnect with Highway 160 closer to the state line. He said it like we'd done it 100 times. In reality, we never had. The area was Navajo Nation land, mostly reservation roads that weren't maintained for through traffic. He swore it would save half an hour. I checked the time on my phone. It was already past 7. We'd be chasing the last of the light, and in July, that meant maybe 90 minutes before full dark. I should have said no. Should have told him we'd sit in traffic like everyone else. But I didn't want to be the cautious one, didn't want to hear him joke about it for the next month. So I said sure, and just like that, we committed to a decision that would follow us home. We topped off at a gas station just south of Shiprock. The wind had died completely, leaving the air thick and still. Heat rolled off the concrete in visible waves. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sterile white glow. The cooler section hummed its constant mechanical drone. We grabbed waters and beef jerky, the kind that comes in tough plastic packages that require teeth to open. The clerk was an older woman with her hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. Her name tag was faded, unreadable. She wasn't chatty, didn't make eye contact while scanning our items. The register beeped with each pass. When Tyler asked if the dirt roads were decent north of town, she stopped moving. Her hand hovered over the scanner. She looked at our keys dangling from Tyler's hand, then at us. Really looked at us, like she was weighing whether it was worth saying anything. Finally, she spoke. Don't go out there after dark. Not a suggestion, not advice, a statement of fact laid on the counter between us like a physical object. Tyler smiled, that easy smile he has, the one that gets him out of speeding tickets. We'll be quick, he said. Be faster, she replied, and something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Her eyes held ours for another second. Then she turned away, bagging our items with deliberate movements. We told ourselves she meant livestock on the road, flash flooding in the washes, drunk drivers weaving home. We told ourselves a lot of things in those next few minutes, standing in that fluorescent lit store while the clock on the wall ticked past 7:15. We paid. She didn't say goodbye. The door chimed as we left, a cheerful sound that felt wrong somehow. Outside, the sun had slid considerably lower. A thin line of orange sat above Shiprock's jagged silhouette, that volcanic plug rising from the desert floor like a broken tooth. The sky above it was deepening from blue to violet. We got in the Tacoma. Tyler adjusted the seat, checked the mirrors. I set my phone on the dash as a clock, watching the minutes display. That was all the planning we did. The first miles out of Shiprock were paved, then patched, then fractured into something that was more crack than asphalt, then finally just dirt. A few houses sat far apart from each other, each with a couple of vehicles in various states of decay and a dog that barely glanced our way as we passed. Satellite dishes pointed at empty sky, laundry hung motionless on lines. 10 minutes in, the homes thinned to nothing. The roads stretched long and flat, shallow washboards rattling the cup holders and making our teeth click together. The desert up there isn't empty. You can see sage and juniper, distant mesas, the bones of old fences, but it can feel empty when you don't see lights for minutes at a time. Everything looks the same. Gray-green brush, red dirt, rock formations that could be landmarks or could be nothing special. We kept the windows cracked to bleed the heat from the cab. The air smelled like dust and creosote, that distinctive desert smell that gets into your clothes and stays there. I told Tyler we should turn back if we didn't hit pavement by full dark. He said we had at least 30 minutes of usable light. Dusk was already proving him wrong. The shadows were lengthening, stretching east from every rock and plant. The sun was half gone behind Shiprock, and the temperature was starting to drop fast the way it does in the desert. The road split at a cattle guard with no sign, no indication which direction led where. Tyler chose left, keeping us generally north. The speedometer hovered around 40. Any faster and the washboard would rattle us apart. Any slower and we'd never reach the highway before dark. We hadn't seen another vehicle since leaving the last paved spur. No headlights ahead, no dust trails, nothing. Somewhere out there, I couldn't say exactly where because every mile looked like the last the sun dropped behind Shiprock completely. We lost all color in an instant. The world went from golden edge to gray to almost black in the space of 5 minutes. Headlights cut a cone ahead of us, turning the dirt pale and somehow lifeless. The cab cooled by degrees. I pulled on a jacket. At 8:19, I started counting minutes, doing math in my head about how far we might have to go. We rounded a long, gradual bend, and she was there, a person in our lane, maybe 50 yards ahead, revealed gradually by the headlights like a photograph developing. Tyler braked. The Tacoma dipped forward, gravel skidding under the tires with a sound like tearing fabric. We rolled to a crawl. She looked young, maybe early 20s. Dark hair fell to her shoulders, uncombed, moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel through the cracked windows. She wore a pale shirt, white or light gray, hard to tell in the headlights, streaked with dust in patterns that looked like handprints. Bare legs from the knees down. Bare feet on the dirt road, no shoes, no socks. One arm hung at her side, limp and motionless, the other raised in a slow, unsteady wave. Palm out, then rotating inward, then back out again. The motion was mechanical, repetitive. No car, no driveway, no fence, no structure of any kind within visible range. Just her, standing in the middle of a dirt road in the dark desert, waving. "You seeing this?" Tyler's voice was tight. "Yeah." We closed the distance to maybe 20 feet, moving at walking speed now, close enough for details I didn't want. Her chin was low, shoulders rounded forward like she was cold or hurt. Her stance was uneven, the left foot seemed to hover slightly, like she couldn't or wouldn't put full weight on it. I reached for the window switch and stopped, my hand hovering over it. Something was wrong, and my body had decided before my brain could name it. We'd spent years stopping for people out here. Flat tires, dead batteries, hauling 5-gallon gas cans to ranchers who'd miscalculated. This was different. Every instinct I had was screaming wrong, wrong, wrong. The hair on my arm stood up. My throat felt tight. "We should pull past and call it in," I said. "Sheriff or tribal police." "Yeah," Tyler agreed. He inched forward. She didn't move aside, didn't flag harder, didn't call out. Just kept that slow, mechanical wave, her palm catching the headlights with each rotation. At 10 feet, I expected her face to change, surprise at seeing us, relief, fear, anything. It didn't. Her lips looked split, darkened with what might have been dried blood or dirt. Her eyes stayed fixed past the bumper, not catching the light the way eyes should, not reflecting at all. The pupils seemed too large, swallowing the iris completely. I told myself there were reasons. Angle, dust on her face, the quality of the headlights. But the thought didn't help. My hands had gone cold despite the jacket. Tyler eased left to go around her. I watched her as we passed, unable to look away. She rotated at the waist like a door on a hinge, not a step. Not shifting her feet, tracking us without moving anything below her ribs. It wasn't a natural movement. The human spine doesn't turn like that, shouldn't turn like that. We rolled on. Tyler checked the rear view. I watched the side mirror, my breath fogging the window. She turned farther, her body still facing the direction we'd come from. Her head swiveled almost 90 degrees. The brake lights lit her face red for a moment, then dark again when Tyler's foot came off the pedal. The expression wasn't vacant or angry or scared, just wrong, misaligned somehow, like a mask worn slightly off-center. "No shoulder, no lights," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Next intersection we call." Tyler nodded. He was gripping the wheel too hard. I could see his knuckles white even in the dim light from the dash. We brought the speed back up to 30, then 35. No service on my phone, not even one bar, no house within miles. Turning back meant driving past her again, maybe stopping, walking up to her in the dark to ask if she needed help. Going forward meant hoping for a good decision point, a place with service, with lights, with other people. I wanted pavement, signs, gas stations, something fixed and normal and bright. We drove in silence. My hands were damp with sweat. My mouth was dry. I kept checking the side mirror, but there was nothing behind us except dust and darkness. Then, motion in the beams again. Same shirt, same dark hair, same shape. This time she was only 30 feet ahead when we saw her. There were no paths, no turnoffs behind us, no way for her to have gotten ahead of us. The road had been straight for the last mile, empty in both directions. We'd been moving at 35 miles per hour. She shouldn't be there, couldn't be there. My brain tried to make it work. Maybe we'd seen someone else. Maybe there were two people out here. But the shirt was identical, the hair the same length, the stance exactly as uneven. Tyler swore, a single, sharp word. He slowed just enough to steer wide, giving her space. As we drew level, maybe 6 feet of clearance between her and my door, she turned her head toward me. Not gradually, one sharp snap, like a bird spotting prey. Up close, I saw dark marks on her forearm, distinct shapes that looked like finger impressions, like someone had grabbed her hard enough to bruise. 4 parallel lines, thumb opposite. Then we were past. Tyler accelerated harder than necessary. The engine whined. She stayed in the mirror longer than she should have, longer than physics allowed. Her arm finally dropped, but not in a normal way. It just fell, dead weight, swinging once before stopping. Then she bent forward at the waist, stiff and unnatural, her back rounding but her legs staying locked straight, like a mannequin being folded at a joint it wasn't meant to fold at. The dashboard clock read 8:27. I couldn't make any of this make sense. The possible explanations, twins, someone playing a prank, us somehow getting turned around, none of them fit. My heart was hammering. I could feel it in my throat, in my temples. Tyler's breathing had gone shallow and quick. We kept going. The road narrowed, brush crowding closer to the edges, branches scraping the passenger side with sounds like fingernails on metal. Then it widened again, opening into a broader valley. The sky ahead lightened slightly, a faint glow that promised the highway, other cars, civilization. I told Tyler we'd stop at the first main road, first light, first anything. He nodded, eyes locked on the road ahead, hands still white-knuckled on the wheel. We hadn't seen her for 3 minutes. I'd been counting when we crested a small rise, and there she was, closer now, offset toward our right headlight, maybe 20 feet ahead. Arms raised overhead now, not waving. Head tilted so far forward her chin nearly touched her chest, hair hanging down and obscuring her face. She swayed slightly, side to side, like she was standing in water. I felt my mouth go completely dry. Tyler, I see her. I see her. His voice was flat, empty of the easy confidence it usually carried. He didn't slow much this time, just enough to control the vehicle. The raised arms weren't waving, they twitched at the wrists, small jerking movements that seemed involuntary. When we lined up with her, level for just a moment, her head snapped up, hair fell away from her face, her eyes locked onto mine through the glass. They were completely black, no white visible at all, and they tracked me with absolute focus as we passed. In the mirror, she pivoted faster than before. Her stance widened, feet spreading to shoulder width. She stepped toward us, one step, clear and deliberate, then another. Then she was closing the distance faster than walking, faster than jogging, moving in a way that my brain couldn't quite process. Her right foot was dragging and snapping forward, dragging and snapping, but it didn't slow her down at all. "She's moving," I said. My voice came out higher than normal. "I'm not looking," Tyler replied. He pressed the accelerator harder. The Tacoma fishtailed briefly on loose gravel before straightening. I couldn't stop watching the mirror. She was still visible in our taillights, now running full out, arms swinging loose at her sides, head angled just enough to keep us in sight. The way she moved it wasn't right. The rhythm was off, like watching a film with frames missing. The brush closed in on both sides, forcing us into a narrow corridor of dirt between walls of sage and juniper. Tyler took a bend too tight. The back tires kicked up a cloud of dust before he corrected, the wheel jerking in his hands. "Where's the highway?" he muttered. "Where the hell is the highway?" Movement ahead again, coming toward us this time, not standing still, that same pale shirt materializing from the darkness. The limp had become a hop, then faster, then a full run. No vehicle had passed us, no side road, no possible way she should be here, ahead of us, closing the gap. Tyler swerved left hard enough that my shoulder hit the door panel. He floored it. Her mouth was open wider now, impossibly wide. I could see teeth, too many teeth, even in white in the headlights. We hit 60 miles per hour, the wheel trembling in Tyler's hands, the washboard road threatening to rattle us into the ditch. She didn't reappear for a long stretch, 20 seconds, 30, but the sense of her stayed. That feeling of being watched, of being followed, of something behind us that was gaining. Then, a flash of movement along the right side. Lower now, not standing, not running upright, moving on all fours, matching our speed for what felt like forever but was probably only seconds. I caught glimpses between the brush, that pale shirt, dark hair streaming back, arms and legs moving in coordination like she'd always moved that way, like it was natural. Then she vanished into the dark brush beyond the headlight's reach. An impact hit the passenger door, sudden and hard. Not a bump, not brush scraping. An exhale, deliberate, with weight behind it. The door panel dimpled inward slightly. I turned, pressing myself back into the seat. She was there, level with my window, her face inches from the glass. Her arm was reaching, fingers splayed wide. I could see under her nails dark crescents, or maybe the nails themselves were dark, too long, too thick. She was keeping pace at 60 miles per hour on all fours. Then she dropped back, falling away into the darkness behind us. The next crest put her dead center in the lane, maybe 40 feet ahead, on all fours still, but motionless now, waiting. Her face was tilted up at us while her body stayed square to the road, spine curved in a way that made my stomach turn. Tyler took the right edge of the road hard, brush hammering the passenger side with impacts that sounded like fists on metal. As we came parallel, her head snapped toward me again, eyes still completely black, mouth still too wide, teeth too even, too white for someone who'd been in the desert, too perfect for the way she moved. We pulled ahead. Another impact slammed the door, harder this time. The glass vibrated but held. The sound was hollow, drum-like. I could feel it in my chest. Then the night changed. Light ahead, off to the left. Distant but unmistakable headlights on what had to be the highway. Red taillights moving in both directions. Civilization. Tyler stayed on it, the Tacoma bouncing hard enough that my head hit the roof. A T intersection appeared, marked with a faded stop sign barely visible in our high beams. He turned left toward the glow without stopping, without even slowing much. The tires scrabbled for purchase. In the mirror, she cut across behind us at an angle, moving fast enough that she was just a blur of pale shirt and dark hair. Then she was gone, actually gone this time. The night behind us was empty. The new road was smoother, recently graded. We hit 65, then 70. The glow resolved into individual lights, trucks, sedans, motorcycles. The highway, real and solid and full of people who weren't her. But then, one more time, she was in our lane ahead. Further out this time, maybe 100 yards. Tyler didn't brake, just took the far right edge of the road, practically in the ditch. In the high beams, she lunged. She covered the distance in 3 bounds, each one impossibly long, angling for my door. I pressed myself back into the seat, one arm coming up instinctively. A hard, quick rake of sound ran along the door panel. Not brush, not rock, contact, deliberate. The sound of something sharp dragging across metal with pressure behind it. 3 distinct lines, parallel, evenly spaced. Then the dirt ended and there was pavement. The change in sound was immediate and startling, from the constant rattle of dirt and gravel to smooth, quiet road noise. Tyler merged onto the highway without signaling. A green sign flashed past in the lights. Another promised a service area in 2 miles. Neither of us spoke. My hands were shaking. My heart was still pounding so hard I felt dizzy. We pulled into the service area under sodium lights that turned everything orange. There were maybe 6 other vehicles in the lot, a semi, a few passenger cars, an RV, normal people doing normal things. Tyler parked away from the building, in a spot with good light. We sat there for a full minute without moving. When I finally opened the door, my legs felt weak. The marks on the passenger door looked worse under the artificial light. 3 parallel gouges down to the primer, each about 8 inches long. They weren't scratches from brush. They were too even, too deliberate. Each one had regularly spaced interruptions, like something had lifted and pressed down repeatedly while dragging. Dust flaked away at my touch, revealing metal underneath. My hand was shaking so badly I had to steady it with the other one. Inside, The service area was too bright and too warm and too normal. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A television played the weather. The cashier, Raymond, according to his name tag, looked up from a phone and asked if we'd been on the dirt roads. The door must have still been open behind us, the marks visible from where he stood. When I told him roughly where we'd been, his expression changed. Went from casual interest to something harder. "Don't stop on those roads after dark," he said. "Not advice, a rule. If someone needs help, you call from town. You don't stop. You don't get out." Another man was in the snack aisle, older, maybe Navajo based on the turquoise jewelry he wore. He overheard and walked over, looked past us to the parking lot. "You boys need to look at your passenger side," he said quietly. "We already did," Tyler said. Raymond followed us to the door, arms crossed over his chest. Under the lights, the marks looked even worse. He studied them for a long moment. "If you feel like you need to talk to somebody, tell the Navajo Nation police exactly where you were, but don't go back, not to show anyone. Not at all. Do you understand?" We understood. We got back in the truck and left. The drive to Durango was uneventful. Traffic was normal. The highway was well lit. Every mile that passed felt like waking up from a dream, except the marks were still there on the door. Real, undeniable. The farther we got from Shiprock, the more my mind tried to turn what happened into something ordinary. A person in distress, confusion, dust in our eyes, but the marks wouldn't let me. In daylight the next morning, they were sharper, cleaner. A faint bloom of rust had risen overnight in the exposed metal, too fast for dry weather and intact paint. I rubbed one of the grooves with my thumb. The rust color came away faintly, like pressing on an old bloodstain. Later that week, I told Thomas, a Navajo coworker from Farmington. He listened without interrupting, his expression carefully neutral. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You don't stop on those roads at night. You just don't. Sometimes what you see out there isn't a person, or it isn't only a person." He told me to wash the truck, to not show the marks off, and if I wanted to sleep better, to buy something small from a local vendor near where we'd come out. As a sign of respect, he said. For what? He didn't specify. The next weekend, Tyler and I drove back to that area. Daylight, highway only, plenty of traffic. We stopped at a roadside stand near the turnoff where we'd emerged. An older woman sold beadwork and carved animals from the back of a pickup. I bought a beaded keychain. Tyler bought a carved wooden fox. We didn't explain. We didn't negotiate the price. We said thank you, left cash, and drove away. I felt something in my shoulders let go, some tension I'd been carrying for days. The scratches never washed out, no matter what we tried. The rust stayed thin but visible. Eventually, Tyler got the door repainted $600 at a body shop in town. The guy doing the work asked what had made marks like that. Tyler told him he didn't know. That was true enough. The keychain's been on my keys ever since. The fox is on Tyler's shelf, next to a photo of his truck from before. We still take drives through the four corners, but never through that stretch. If traffic on the highway is bad, it's bad. You sit in it. You listen to podcasts or music or just the sound of the engine. You let the sun go down surrounded by other people, other vehicles, lights in every direction. The ending is simple. We made it home. The marks cost money to fix. The memories didn't fade the way I hoped they would. I still check the mirrors more than I used to. Still get tense when the sun starts to drop and I'm not on a main road. Still remember that feeling of being watched, of being hunted, of something that shouldn't exist moving faster than it should, getting closer. I tell this story the way Raymond told it to us. Plain and simple. Don't stop on those roads after dark. If you think someone needs help, call it in from town. Keep your doors locked. Keep moving. Stay on the highway. The last time Tyler and I drove through that area, we passed the turnoff in daylight. He turned down the radio without being asked. "No shortcuts," he said. "Yeah," I said. "No shortcuts." It's a simple rule, not complicated, not hard to follow, but it's a rule that exists for a reason, taught by people who've seen things they don't talk about except in warnings to strangers at gas stations. And if you're smart, if you want to get home safe, you follow it, every time, no exceptions. Because out there in the desert, on those dirt roads after dark, you might see someone who needs help. And you have to understand, really understand, that stopping might be the last decision you ever make. I'm writing this down because someone needs to know what can happen on the Abrams Falls Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee. Not for attention, not for validation, just so the next person who signs that register at the trailhead kiosk might think twice about the time they start walking. It was early December, a Tuesday, the kind of dead zone weekday when most sensible people are at work and the park feels like it belongs to you alone. The temperature hovered in the low 40s. The sky hung gray and close, that flat winter light that makes everything look two-dimensional. My cousin Lance and I had driven down from Knoxville with the simple goal of getting some air and stretching our legs before the week swallowed us whole again. We'd done this trail before, 5 miles round trip, easy terrain, nothing technical, the kind of walk you can finish in under 3 hours if you keep moving and don't stop to photograph every cascade. At the visitor center, an older volunteer with a name tag that read Barbara reminded us about the time. Her exact words were, "Be back before dusk. Wildlife gets active near the switchbacks this time of year, and you don't want to be on that trail when the light goes." We nodded. We'd heard the bear warnings before. Every visitor center in the Smokies has the same posters, the same reminders about keeping distance, making noise, not running. We thought we knew what we were preparing for. Black bears getting bold before denning, maybe an aggressive buck during rut season, the usual concerns. We signed the trail register, my signature, then Lance's, both of us noting the time, 2:10 p.m. The plan was simple. Walk for an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. Turn around if it felt late. Get back to the parking area before the afternoon loop road traffic started picking up again. Simple, reasonable, the kind of plan that should have worked. The first 40 minutes were perfect. The trail followed Abrams Creek, the water running fast and loud to our right. The path wound through laurel and rhododendron, the tread worn smooth by decades of boots. We passed 2 couples heading back to the trailhead, both pairs looking tired but satisfied. A solo hiker with expensive trekking poles and a hydration pack gave us a nod as he powered past, moving like he had a schedule to keep. The forest smelled the way it should. Damp leaves, cold water, that mineral scent of wet rock. Roots crossed the trail in thick cords. The dirt was slick in places where the canopy kept the sun from drying it out. Lance and I kept a steady pace, not pushing, just moving. We talked about work, about his kids' school play, about whether we'd stop for barbecue on the way home. Normal things, comfortable things. At the 35-minute mark, maybe 40, we reached a bench. It was one of those simple wooden seats the Park Service installs at wider sections of trail, the kind of spot where you can sit and catch your breath and look through the brush toward the water below. We didn't sit, but we did stop, and that's when I saw it. The deer was uphill from us, maybe 15 yards away, standing on the slope above the trail. At first glance, it was just a buck, a large one. But something about it pulled my attention and held it there with an uncomfortable grip. It wasn't feeding. Deer browse constantly, heads down, lips working at whatever vegetation they can reach. This one stood absolutely still, head elevated slightly, not looking at anything in particular, just standing. The posture was wrong, too rigid, too deliberate, like it was posing. The antlers caught my attention next. The rack was tall, maybe 8 or 9 points, but the symmetry was off. One side had longer tines than the other, and the points didn't match the usual pattern you see on whitetail bucks in this region. Strips of what looked like gray velvet hung from one of the main beams, dragging down in ragged pieces. But it was December. Bucks shed their velvet in early fall, usually by September. By December, the antlers should be hard and clean, polished from rubbing against trees during the rut. This velvet was wrong, old, decomposing. The strips moved slightly in the breeze, and I could see where the tissue had torn away from the bone in uneven tiers. "Hey there, big guy," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Easy, we're just passing through." The buck didn't react. No ear flick, no head shake, no nervous stomp of the front hooves. It just stood there, and its eyes, God, its eyes didn't look away from us, didn't shift to scan for other threats, didn't blink that I could see. They just held us in place. I've spent enough time in these mountains to know animal behavior. Deer are nervous creatures. They're prey animals, wired for flight, constantly alert. Even the big bucks during rut, when they're pumped full of hormones and aggression, still maintain that baseline wariness. They watch you, assess you, and then they make a decision: ignore, flee, or posture. This one didn't do any of those things. It just stood there on the slope, and the longer I looked at it, the more details started to bother me. The stance was too square. Weight distributed evenly on all 4 legs in a way that looked almost planted. The neck was too thick where it met the shoulders, the proportions slightly off, and the way it held its head, that slight elevation, made it look like it was looking down at us rather than simply observing us. "We need to back up," I said to Lance, keeping my voice quiet but firm. Slowly, keep something between you and it. Lance had been staring at the buck too. He nodded once, and we began to ease backward down the trail, moving carefully, not turning our backs on the animal. We angled toward the downhill side of the path, putting tree trunks between us and the slope whenever possible. The buck still didn't move, not a muscle, not a twitch, and then it did something that made my stomach drop. It rose, not a bound, not a rear with front hooves striking out, not the explosive burst of motion you expect from a startled deer. It rose the way a person stands up from a chair, smooth, controlled, deliberate. The hind legs straightened first, extending at the joints with a mechanical precision that looked completely alien on a deer's body. The rear quarters lifted, and the spine, instead of dipping or curving the way it should when an animal balances on two legs, remained almost perfectly level. The chest came up, rising higher and higher above the slope, and the head stayed fixed in position as if the whole thing was used to moving this way. The front legs hung down, longer than they should have been, the joints visible and wrong. Where there should have been the single-axis bend of a deer's front leg, there were articulation points that looked too much like elbows. The ends of those legs weren't hooves. They were pale, almost gray, and segmented in a way that made my brain scramble for a comparison. They looked like they could flex, like they could grip. The entire motion took maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds of watching something that should be impossible happen right in front of me on a normal hiking trail in broad daylight. Lance made a sound in his throat. Not a word, just a sound. Back, I said, hearing my voice come out steadier than I felt. Keep backing, don't run. We moved faster now, still facing the thing on the slope, still not turning away. The trail curved slightly, and for a moment I thought we might lose sight of it around the bend. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat broke out on my back despite the cold. As we rounded the curve, I glanced down at the trail surface. There were marks in the leaf litter near our boots, 2 thin parallel lines dragged across the leaves, running perpendicular to the path. They were close together, maybe 6 inches apart, and shallow, the kind of marks you might see if someone had dragged a pair of sticks across the ground at shin height. But there was nothing on the trail that could have made them. No fallen branches, no equipment, just those 2 lines, fresh and clean, cutting through the debris. I didn't stop to examine them. We kept moving. The trail straightened out after the bend, and I risked a glance back over my shoulder. The thing was still there on the slope, still upright, and as I watched, it took a step, then another. It was walking, on 2 legs, down toward the trail. "It's coming," Lance said, and I heard the tight control in his voice. He was scared, so was I, but panic on this trail meant broken bones, or worse, the drop-off to the creek was steep and littered with rocks. "Steady," I said. "We know this trail. We keep moving. We don't slip." The thing reached the trail surface and stepped onto the packed dirt. It took 3 full paces upright, balanced, purposeful directly across the flat section of the bench cut. The front limbs swung slightly with each step, and I could see the joints bend and extend with each movement. The ends, those pale, segmented ends, touched the ground briefly with each stride, and I heard a soft brushing sound, almost like fingers dragging across fabric. The antlers scraped against a low branch. The sound made my teeth ache, dry and rasping, like bone on wood, accompanied by the whisper of dead vines sliding along the tines. It was a small sound, barely audible over the creek noise, but it cut through everything else. The thing's head tilted slightly, and its gaze, I can't call it anything else, locked onto us with an intensity that felt deliberate. It knew we were retreating. It understood what that meant, and it was deciding what to do about it. We traded positions on the trail, so Lance was on the outer edge at the next tight corner. He had better balance than me, and the downhill side of the path was slick with wet leaves. One wrong step there meant a tumbling fall toward the creek bed 30 feet below, and at our age, that kind of fall meant compound fractures or worse. "Root there," Lance said, pointing at a thick cord of oak root crossing the tread. "Step over. Don't try to step on it." "Got it," I said. My breath was coming faster now, but I kept it controlled. Panic burns oxygen. Panic makes you stupid. We moved down the trail in a rhythm. Step, check behind, step, check behind. Every time we completed a switchback and looked back up the slope, the thing appeared again at the high edge of the bench cut. Same distance from us, maybe 30 yards. Never closer, never farther. Just maintaining that steady, uncomfortable proximity. It had dropped back to all fours, but the movement was wrong. Normal deer move with a bouncing gait, a kind of elastic energy that comes from those powerful hind legs. This thing moved with a smooth, flowing stride that looked more like a predator than prey. No bouncing, no wasted motion, just efficient, purposeful forward movement. And it was quiet, too quiet. Deer crashing through the brush make noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, the occasional grunt or snort. This thing moved through the undergrowth like it weighed nothing, like it was made of something other than flesh and bone. The only sounds it made were incidental: brush contact, leaf displacement, the occasional scrape of those antlers against low branches. I kept my eyes on landmarks, burning them into memory. An old drill hole in a large boulder near the trail, probably from some ancient Park Service project. A broken trekking pole segment lying in the leaves 5 feet off the path, the grip still wrapped in faded blue tape. A dense cluster of mountain laurel that forced the trail to bend closer to the drop-off. I knew I'd need to describe all of this later. I knew I'd need to prove we weren't making this up, that we hadn't panicked over nothing. Every time I thought about speeding up, about breaking into a jog despite the risks, the thing would move one deliberate pace forward on the high edge of the trail. Just one step. Just enough to remind us it was there, that it could close the distance if it wanted to. And each time it did that, I'd picture my boots slipping out from under me, picture the long tumbling fall, picture lying at the bottom of the slope with a broken leg while that thing picked its way down to me at its own pace. So we walked, fast but controlled, steady breathing, careful foot placement. The creek noise stayed constant off to our right, water over rock, that white noise that usually sounds peaceful but now just seemed to cover up other sounds. The light was getting flatter, that late afternoon quality where shadows stop giving you depth perception and everything starts to look like a stage set. Then we heard voices ahead. 2 hikers came around the bend toward us, moving uphill at a casual pace. They were older, maybe in their 60s, both wearing tan bucket hats and carrying binoculars on chest harnesses. Birders. The kind of people who spend hours standing still in the woods waiting for a glimpse of a scarlet tanager or a pileated woodpecker. They saw our faces and stopped walking, just froze mid-step. "There's a buck on the trail," I said, keeping my voice level, acting strange. "We're heading back to the parking area. You might want to come with us." The taller one, a woman with gray hair tied back in a bun, looked past us up the trail, squinting. "I don't see." She cut off. She'd seen it. The thing had stepped onto the trail behind us, maybe 40 yards back now. It stood there on all fours, but even at that distance, something about its proportions looked wrong. Too tall at the shoulder, front legs too long, head held at an angle that didn't match any deer I'd ever seen. "God almighty," the shorter birder said, a man with a thick gray beard. "What's wrong with it?" "Don't know," Lance said. "But we're not waiting to find out. Come with us, now." They didn't argue. The 4 of us formed a loose group and continued down the trail, moving faster now but still careful. I was acutely aware that 2 more people meant 2 more chances for someone to slip, to panic, to make a mistake that would force the rest of us to stop. The trail widened slightly, and for maybe 30 yards we had a clear view of the path ahead and behind. The thing stepped out onto the cleanest part of the trail on the high side, and for several seconds, every part of it was visible in the flat gray light. The back was too flat, almost like someone had pressed it down with a heavy hand. The shoulders rolled forward under skin that looked too thin, like parchment stretched over a frame. The spine barely moved with its breathing if it was breathing. The front joints flexed and extended with each step, those elbow-like hinges bending in ways that made my mind reject what I was seeing. And the ends of those front legs pressed against the trail surface with a soft flexibility that was nothing like hooves. They bent slightly at contact, like fingers pressing into clay, then released and lifted for the next step. "Those are hands," the male birder said, his voice perfectly steady, clinical even. "I'm looking at hands." He said it the way you'd identify a bird species, confident, factual, with decades of observation behind the statement. This was a man who'd spent his life putting names to shapes, and now he was looking at a shape that didn't have a name. The thing held its position for a moment, and in that frozen tableau I could see every detail. The strips of dead velvet hanging from the antlers, moving slightly in the breeze. The way the rib cage didn't expand and contract with breathing. The complete absence of any whitetail flash that gives whitetail deer their name. The eyes darker than they should be, rounder than they should be, fixed on our group with an attention that felt more human than animal. Then it moved again, maintaining its distance, and we kept walking. The last 100 yards felt endless. The trail descended more steeply here, the switchbacks tighter, the drop-off on the creek side more severe. I could hear car doors now, the distant sound of engines, a child's laughter echoing through the trees. Normal sounds, human sounds, safety sounds. The trailhead opened up ahead of us, the small gravel parking lot, the information kiosk with its weathered map under plexiglass, the split-rail fence that marked the boundary between the maintained trail and the surrounding woods. There were 3 vehicles, our Subaru, a blue minivan with Ohio plates, and a Park Service truck. A family stood next to the minivan, parents and 2 kids, maybe 13 and 16 years old. They had a blanket spread on the ground with snacks laid out, taking advantage of the last warm light before packing up. The father, a heavy-set man in a fleece vest, looked past us toward the trail mouth. His expression changed instantly. He saw it. His teenage son took a step forward and braced his hands on his knees, staring. "What the hell is that?" he said, and his mother shushed him automatically before she turned and saw it too. The thing stood at the top of the cut where the trail entered the parking area. It was fully upright again, rear legs planted, front legs hanging down, head and antlers clearly visible above the brush line. Standing there in full view of 6 adults and 2 children in broad daylight in a national park parking lot. It looked at us, all of us, moving its head slightly to take in the whole group, and I swear to God I could feel the weight of that gaze, the assessment happening behind those 2 round eyes. Then it dropped. The motion was sudden but completely controlled, a smooth fold that brought it from 2 legs to 4 in a single fluid movement. No stumble, no crash, just a practiced, efficient transition from one mode of locomotion to another. It turned and moved along the top of the embankment, heading for a thick stand of rhododendron. The movement was fast, that same ground-covering stride we'd been watching for the past hour, but now without the restraint. It moved with the kind of speed that should have been accompanied by the crash of breaking branches, the scatter of startled birds, the thud of heavy impact. But there was almost no sound, just the whisper of brush parting and the creek continuing its endless flow over rock. It vanished into the rhododendron, and the forest swallowed it completely. For maybe 5 seconds, nobody moved. We all stood there in the parking lot, strangers united by witnessing something that shouldn't exist, something that violated basic rules about how animals move and behave. The park ranger's truck door opened. A young ranger, probably mid-30s, fit, with the kind of competent air that comes from actual wilderness experience rather than just book learning, stepped out and walked toward us. His name tag read, Phillips. "Folks all right?" he asked, looking at our faces. He'd clearly been monitoring the trailhead, waiting for us to come out. "We're okay," I said. "Not hurt, but that deer, I saw it," Phillips said quietly. "End of it anyway. You were followed?" "The whole way down," Lance said. "From the bench at mile marker 2. Phillips nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd been thinking. "Let's get you over to the visitor center. I need to make some calls." The visitor center's back office smelled like burnt coffee and paper. Phillips sat us down and brought water bottles while he got on his radio. The 4 birders were there too. It turned out their names were George and Linda, and they'd been coming to the Smokies for 20 years. The family from Ohio had declined to stick around, packing up their van in record time and heading out before Phillips could get their full statement. "I need you to walk me through it," Phillips said, pulling out a notebook. Not a tablet, not a phone, an actual paper notebook with a pen clipped to the cover. "Start from when you first saw it. Take your time. Details matter." So I told him. Everything. The way it stood too still. The velvet strips on the antlers. The unnatural rising motion. The pursuit down the trail. The parallel drag marks in the leaves. The way it moved on all 4s with too much control and too little sound. The upright stance at the trailhead. George confirmed the hand observation, and Linda added details about the shoulder structure that I'd missed, how the joint looked wrong. Too much like a human clavicle and not enough like a deer's leg assembly. Phillips wrote it all down, not interrupting, not editorializing. When I finished, he looked at Lance. "Anything to add?" "The eyes," Lance said. "I kept coming back to the eyes. They didn't move right. Deer eyes are always moving, always scanning. These just stared, like they were thinking." Phillips made a note, then closed his notebook. "I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't the first report. It's not even the first one this month." That hit me like cold water. "What?" "We've had 6 other encounters reported since mid-November, all on this trail, all describing something similar. Deer that don't move right, deer that stand upright, deer that follow hikers at a fixed distance. One couple 2 weeks ago said it matched their pace for 40 minutes. They practically ran the last mile, and it kept up the whole time." "What is it?" Linda asked. Phillips shook his head. "I don't know. Wildlife biology says it's impossible. Deer anatomy doesn't support sustained bipedal movement. The muscle structure isn't there. The skeletal articulation is wrong. The balance mechanism doesn't work. But I've seen the tracks now from 3 different encounters. I've seen the trail camera footage from the automated station near the bridge. And now I've seen it myself from a distance. And, I pressed, and it's not attacking anyone. It's not threatening. It follows. It observes. And then it leaves. Every single time. No injuries. No property damage. Nothing. So what are you doing about it? George asked, his birder's precision applying itself to a very different kind of observation problem now. We've closed the trail twice for sweeps. Found nothing. We've got cameras at every half-mile marker now. We're tracking it best we can. But whatever it is, it's smart enough to avoid the cameras when it matters and bold enough to walk through them when it doesn't. He stood up and opened a file drawer, pulling out a folder. Inside were printed photos, trail camera shots. Most showed normal wildlife: deer, raccoons, turkeys, 1 black bear. But 3 showed something else. The first showed a deer-shaped figure at the edge of the frame, caught mid-step. The proportions looked off even in the grainy night vision image. The second showed the same figure, closer, head turned toward the camera. The eyes reflected the camera flash in a way that looked more like a primate than a deer, too much white showing around the pupil. The third photo made my breath catch. It showed the thing upright, fully bipedal, standing in the middle of the trail at 2:47 a.m., according to the timestamp. The front legs were clearly visible hanging down, the segmented ends just discernible in the image quality, and it was looking directly at the camera. That's from 3 nights ago, Phillips said. Trail marker 7, about half a mile from where you first saw it. Have you sent this to wildlife experts? Linda asked. Yes. National Park Service, Zoology Division, University of Tennessee Wildlife Program, 2 independent cryptozoologists we consulted with quietly. Everyone says the same thing. Anatomically impossible. Probably a hoax or a misidentification. But I've got 7 groups of witnesses now, including 2 wildlife photographers and a retired park ranger. These aren't tourists who've never seen a deer before. He put the photos away and looked at us seriously. Here's what I can tell you. The trail stays open. I don't have cause to close it based on what we've seen. But we're putting up additional warning signs about wildlife activity. We're recommending groups of 3 or more, earlier start times, and mandatory headlamps. And we're asking anyone who encounters this thing to report to me immediately, with as much detail as possible. You think there's only one? Lance asked. Phillips hesitated. I hope so. It's been 4 months since that afternoon on the Abrams Falls Trail. Lance and I haven't gone back. Maybe we will eventually, but not yet. Not until I can think about that trail without feeling the weight of those eyes on the back of my neck. We do still hike. We go to other trails in the park, Laurel Falls, Rainbow Falls, even Alum Cave when we're feeling ambitious. But we follow new rules now. Rules we made up ourselves based on what we learned. Never start a trail with less than 3 hours until sunset. The thing we saw became active in late afternoon. Maybe that's when it hunts, or maybe that's when it feels safe enough to move. Either way, we don't give it the advantage of fading light. Never hike alone. This should be standard practice anyway, but now it's non-negotiable. Whatever that thing is, it's smart enough to evaluate groups. It maintained distance from 4 people more carefully than it did from 2. Numbers matter. Trust your gut about animal behavior. If something about a deer's posture feels wrong, if the eyes don't move right, if the stance looks too deliberate, back away immediately. Don't wait to be proven right. Don't worry about looking foolish. Just leave. Count your pace against posted hours religiously. Park Service closing times aren't suggestions. They're based on decades of experience about when trails become dangerous. We used to treat them as rough guidelines. Now we treat them as hard limits. Know your exit points before you need them. On every trail now, I note landmarks, distances, and alternative routes. I look for where the trail intersects roads, where parking areas are located, where ranger stations sit. If we need to move fast, I want to know exactly where we're going. Don't trust sounds that don't match their sources. This is harder to explain, but since that day, I've become hyper-aware of how sounds should fit together in the woods. Bird calls should come with bird movement. Footsteps should come with breathing. Breaking branches should come with the crash of a body moving through brush. If the sound doesn't match, don't investigate it. Document everything. I carry a small notebook now, and if anything feels wrong, I write it down immediately. Time, location, description, weather conditions. I take photos of trail markers, of unusual tracks, of anything that might matter later. Memory is unreliable, especially when you're scared. Writing is permanent. The Park Service has quietly updated their trail conditions website. Abrams Falls Trail now has a yellow warning flag for unusual wildlife activity. The description is vague, something about animals displaying non-typical behavior patterns and recommendations for group hiking during daylight hours only. Most people probably don't even notice it, but it's there. George and Linda still go to the park, but they've shifted to the northern trails now: Porter's Creek, Ramsey Cascades, the quieter sections where fewer people go. They sent us a Christmas card with a note saying they'd seen something interesting but not alarming on the Porter's Creek Trail in January, but they didn't elaborate. I'm not sure I want to know. Phillips emails occasionally with updates. He's up to 14 reported encounters now, all on the same trail, all describing similar behavior. The thing or things hasn't hurt anyone, hasn't charged, hasn't made contact, hasn't done anything overtly aggressive. It just follows and watches. But that's what bothers me most, the watching, the way it maintained that exact distance, the way it timed its movements to match ours, the way it stood at the trailhead and looked at all of us like it was taking notes. That's not animal behavior. That's not instinct. That's something else. I've read theories online, everything from misidentified bears with mange to genetic mutations to elaborate hoaxes involving costumes. None of them fit what I saw. Bears don't move like that. Genetic mutations don't work that fast or that completely, and no costume I've ever seen could replicate the way those joints moved, the way the thing transitioned from 2 legs to 4 with that fluid control. Last week I drove past the Abrams Falls trailhead on the loop road. It was mid-afternoon, clear and cold, and there were 6 cars in the parking area. Normal hikers starting a normal afternoon walk on a popular trail in a national park. I slowed down, watching the trailhead, half expecting to see something watching them back. I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows and the gray winter light filtering through bare branches. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something saw me. If you're planning to hike that trail, go ahead. It's a beautiful walk, and statistically, you'll be fine. Most people are. But follow the recommendations. Start early. Go in groups. Stay alert. And if you see a deer that doesn't act like a deer, don't wait to figure out what it actually is. Just leave. Walk back the way you came, keep something between you and it, and don't stop until you're back in your car with the doors locked. Report it to the ranger on duty, give them details, and let them decide what to do with the information. Because here's what I know now. The woods are bigger than we think they are, and the things that live there are stranger than we've been taught to expect. We like to believe we understand our national parks, that they're mapped and measured and explained. We like to think that the age of undiscovered things is over, that science has cataloged everything worth cataloging. But that thing on the Abrams Falls Trail proved me wrong. It exists, it moves, it thinks, and it's patient. That's what keeps me up sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn. Not the fear of what it might do, but the patience it showed. The way it could have closed the distance at any time but chose not to. The way it followed us for an hour at exactly the same distance, like it was conducting an experiment, like it was learning. What happens when it finishes learning? What happens when it decides it knows enough about how we move, how we think, how we react when we're afraid? I don't know, and I'm not eager to find out. So I hike earlier now. I stick to crowded trails. I check behind me more often than I used to, and when I see a deer standing too still on a hillside above the path, I don't stop to admire it. I just keep walking, and I don't look back until I'm sure I'm alone.